Good morning, everyone. I am Montgomery County Council President Gabe Albornoz, and welcome on this Tuesday, May 3rd. We will begin today's full council agenda with two presentations, and the first is a proclamation recognizing National Physical Education and Sports Week, May 1 through 7, by Councilmember Juando. If everybody is here for that proclamation, could please come forward and join Councilmember Juando in front of the dais.
I don't want to be alone up here. Yeah, come on, everybody. Hey, how are you? Good morning. There you go, perfect. Hey, how are you? Good to see you. All right. Good morning, everybody. We got two great proclamations today. This is about physical education awareness, as you heard. And we're going to have a proclamation. I don't know if we've done this one before. I think this is the first time. So we like first times. National PE and Sports Week. And Dr. Kara Grant, who's an awesome, the head of our pre-K adapted physical education, health education, and physical education for MCPS, which has the longest titles, MCPS always does. And then I'm going to introduce everybody real quick and just tell you a little bit about why we're doing this. We have Jasmir, is that right? Did I say? Jasmir's not here. Okay, we're still going to say hello to her. Teresa Schatzer, okay, who is our health education content specialist. Jennifer Rushin, who is our physical education content specialist, and they're all in great shape, as you can tell. Karen Cart, an adapted physical education content specialist. Is she here? She couldn't make it. Okay, she's working out. Jimmy Little. Okay, Jimmy, physical education and health and education resource teacher at Julius West Middle School. Is Mike Grant here? I think I know Mike. Good, yeah, good to see. No, the big one, Big Mike Grant. He's the parent of four, one alum, one elementary, one middle, and one high school. And both Councilmember Albornoz and I are parents of four, so we know what that's like. Bryce Grant. Yeah, hey, Bryce. He was an elementary student here in MCPS. Reuben Grant. There we go. And Mike Grant III. All right. And you're not on my list. Yes. Nikki Hazel, who's our associate superintendent over these programs. We wanted to do this today because we all know we've been through a lot coming through this pandemic, and our kids have dealt with a lot. And physical education and sports week is always important, but it's especially important this year as we've re-entered school, and kids need social, emotional, and other outlets to deal with what has been a period of trauma. And sports are an important part, and physical activity in general, not necessarily connected to sports, are an important part of that. And just a little bit about what we do here in the county. Montgomery County physical education teachers provide annual physical education instruction through 8th grade and a one-year graduation requirement in physical education with the option for electives. We have close to 800 physical education teachers in MCPS, and they're serving our students in a whole range of areas. I know that's one of my kids' favorite class, of course, depending on the day, depending on how hard you guys are making them work. And as a former high school and college athlete myself, but starting as an elementary kid, just starting with every sport, I know how much of an important outlet it was for me to focus and get my energy out. And coming out of this pandemic, we know it's been a tough time. So I really appreciate all of our 800 folks across MCPS and anywhere else, our youth sports and others that are doing this great work. I want to read the proclamation, and then I'll allow our Associate Superintendent and Dr. Grant, whoever wants, both and, to make a brief remarks. All right. Whereas National Physical Education and Sport Week is recognized annually for the first week of May to highlight the importance of physical education, and whereas physical education is a pillar of our educational system in our first line of defense in combating disease, and whereas Montgomery County physical education educators teach our students foundational material that will follow them throughout their lives and their wellness journeys. We are incredibly grateful for their work to support our students and families, and whereas It is imperative that every child has the opportunity to play sports and experience the joy and camaraderie associated with physical education. And whereas learning the importance of health and wellness, as well as the many forms of health and wellness that it takes, is an education every American should receive. We should all have equal opportunity to utilize this education in whichever form works best for the individual. And whereas physical education connects students from all backgrounds with cultural practices through sports and teamwork, promoting healthy relationships and a sense of community. Now therefore be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland hereby celebrates National Physical Education and Sport Week and appreciates the great contributions of all our physical education educators. And I see one of our former school board members as well. You'll be up here in a second for our next proclamation. And be it further resolved that the County Council encourages all county residents to do the same. Presented this day, the 3rd of May in the year 2022, signed by myself and the Council President on behalf of all council members. So let's give them a big round of applause. And we will hear, I think, from Dr. Grant first about why this is important.
Thank you, Council Member Jawando, for this moment. As a physical education person, University of Maryland graduate, I grew up in this community, and like you said, we've never done it before. We've never taken the time to recognize it. But all of us have recognized the mental health issues that we're dealing with as adults, children, everybody we're serving. And what we know in physical education and health education is what we do for kids is preventative work. It teaches them coping skills to get through these times, and it empowers them to help others. I mean, think of a time when you went out and played, right? That comfort level of play, you got that from your own creative ability, but also from what PE teachers do every single day with helping you feel comfortable in moving your body. And so we really just wanted to take time for the work PE teachers are doing. It's been a really hard year. And our team that's here from Central Office, we're like, we need to really make sure that teachers feel appreciated. It's Teacher Appreciation Week. How can we give extra acknowledgement and kudos to the work they're doing for kids every day? And so we have Mr. Little as a representative of our teachers. And then selfishly, I brought my children because one represents elementary school children that we're serving, another represents middle school children that we're serving, and another represents high school students that we're serving. So you have a visual representation of the students that are receiving the services that they're getting every day in our county. So thank you for that ongoing support of Montgomery County Public Schools education and funding. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. And then Ms. Hazel, our Associate Superintendent.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, I just want to thank you all for recognizing physical education in Montgomery County. I do want to thank also and recognize our Board of Education and also our community, because physical education in Montgomery County is something that we really support. And we have in our county a full offering of physical education courses in our school district, more than many other school districts. And so we just want to thank and recognize our community, our Board of Education, for making that a priority. As Dr. Grant said, for many of our students coming back, particularly from the pandemic, physical education is the one thing they could count on for stress relief and to really excel and do really well in an area. And I want to thank all of our teachers and our specialists for supporting our students who come to us with many needs, with many skill levels, and they are there to support them. And so I just want to thank them for that and thank our County Council.
Thank you. All right. Well, we'll take a picture. I don't know if my colleagues want to do some physical education and come down and take a picture with these great folks.
I also wanted to shout out my dad, who's a retired MCPS PE teacher.
All right. Hey, Dad.
All right, good morning. Why don't we pause for 5 minutes? Colleagues are on their way, and then we will formally start the next very important commemoration this morning. So let's pause for 5 minutes.
Mr. President and colleagues, just wanted to say good morning from Texas.
All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Do we need a countdown? No? Okay, great. Well, good morning again, everyone, and welcome to the Council's 2022 Asian American and Pacific Islander Month commemoration. After 2 years of remotely recognizing this important month, I'm delighted and excited that we can all join in person once again to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Month. Today and throughout this month, we pause to recognize and reflect on the history and achievements of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders across our county, state, and nation. These communities are some of the most culturally and linguistically diverse groups in America. Here at home in Montgomery County, Our community would be incomplete without the voices of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders who have chosen to live, work, and raise their families here. More than 161,600 residents identify themselves as Asian Americans or Pacific Islanders in our inclusive community. And these residents hail from 37 different countries of origin. We honor the essential roles that these residents play in our county. These community members also lend their rich heritage and expertise to enhance the quality of life in our county. We celebrate and honor the invaluable contributions these communities have made and continue to make to our culture, the arts, business, law, medicine, public service, science, technology, sports, and so much more, including the residents who have served on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, such as our doctors, our healthcare providers, first responders, teachers, and other essential workers. During one of the most difficult 2-year spans in our nation's history, which included times of deep pain and fear because of racially motivated hate crimes, we honor the courage, leadership, and resilience shown by the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities and commit ourselves to promoting racial equity. We want you to know that we continue to stand in solidarity with all of you. To highlight how the arts have helped to heal our community, this year's theme for today's council commemoration is Advancing Asian American and Pacific Islander Leaders Through Collaboration in the Arts. I want to express my appreciation to all who shared their stories and their art in the video that we will see next. I also want to thank Mershai Salou and Joseph Thompson from the communications team who did a beautiful job producing the video segment. After the video is shown, my colleagues and I will come forward and read, each of us, from a component of the proclamation, and we will hear from distinguished guests that we've invited to speak on behalf of our Asian American and Pacific Islander community this morning. With that, let's fire up the video.
Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have played vital roles in shaping our nation and county, from serving in public office to medical innovation to shattering barriers and transforming our cultural landscape. During this Asian American and Pacific Islander Month, we celebrate and highlight their achievements. This year's theme is Advancing Leaders Through Collaboration in the Arts, and we'll introduce you to some Asians making a difference in their communities, specifically those propagating their culture through film, dance, music, and other forms of art. And we'll begin with Chinese ethnic musical traditions, where music is considered a highly calming influence. Hailing from a family of musicians, Ru Fu grew up with a burning passion for music and a dream to follow suit.
My mom sings every day for hours. That's her favorite leisure activity. And I think she was a single mom. So during her most difficult times, she would go to karaoke. And because there was no one else to take care of me, she would take me with her. So I just grew up listening to her singing a lot. And she just sang and sang. And I picked things up.
Rui specializes in improvisational interpretations of Chinese ethnic musical traditions and modernist portrayals of ancient meditative music. Through her music, she wants to communicate positive messages about China, unity, and diversity.
I always feel that I hope people can learn a bit more about each other's culture and the context behind what we're saying before we go into negotiations and before we judge each other. I don't feel that's being done enough in today's world. So I hope that through music, this medium that can more easily appeal to others and open up doors through beauty, that can help us find more opportunities to find common ground and to open up more spaces for opportunities for bridging those differences and coming up with different solutions.
A successful Chinese dulcimer and improviser, Chao Tian's mission has always been to break down barriers and work across creative genres.
If people said music is universal language, I think there must be some accents and dialects in the language system. Just like me, I came to this country with my Chinese musical dialect. And I use this dialect to tell my story, share my culture with people. Every audience heard my music. Every musicians collaborated with me. They have already tasted a little bit about my culture in some ways.
Chao has always been dedicated to preserving the Chinese musical heritage, but performing to a culturally diverse audience in Montgomery County and elsewhere has made her want to create a more universal way to communicate her Chinese musical vocabulary.
I'm trying to reshape my dialect to help people better understand my music language. The main way that I do this reshaping process is through improvising music.
Having lived through the Vietnam War as a child, Odan Nguyen depicts life during those years through her paintings. Putting brush to canvas gave her some sort of comfort to ease the misery of a ravaging war.
I grew up without a father, so it was very, very difficult in a conservative city. So art was my outlet where I went to get comfort, to feel happy.
Her passion for painting certainly helped her overcome the most difficult time of her life, but the agonizing memory still lingers to this day.
Sometimes I cry because of the difficulties I went through in my childhood when I was in Vietnam. It was always running away from the bullets. Many times I nearly got killed because bullets was flying all over. Looking back, sometimes I wish it didn't happen. But then if it didn't happen, my art would be different now. I would be a different person.
And now onto a different form of art, graphic design. Doyle's song never had the intention to join the world of fashion, but his sense of style impressed others. The countless compliments he received prompted his decision to go into retail.
I didn't even want to work retail. I would go into stores and people would try to hire me all the time. It was just like my love of clothes. I just really liked a lot of apparel and footwear a whole lot.
Doyle would eventually create his own clothing brand that spoke to the life he had led. To show that there isn't always a specific formula to success, and each person has the power to build anything.
Enemies Forever is a brand that I created. It's basically, I hate to admit, a name that is probably after my own personality. But Enemies Forever represents being real, letting people know that we don't really have to have what everybody else is doing and we can just be ourselves forever and forever.
Although he was born and raised in the U.S., Doyle says his Korean heritage plays a huge role in the person he is today and the kind of graphics he designs.
If you look at the brand, we use a lot of the cultural references. If you look at the shirt I'm wearing now, we wrote Enemies Forever in Korean on the shirt. We use a lot of the Asian things that I grew up with to express our art.
Documentary filmmaking has long been used to foster social justice. And that's exactly what award-winning documentary filmmaker Yi Chen is doing.
I think my background as a Chinese immigrant and also my identity as an Asian American really shaped the kind of stories that I want to tell. So I'm interested in telling stories about my own community. I think this film will raise awareness for audience to know who Asian Americans are. I think for me, that interest comes from the desire to tell stories that are underrepresented in media and also reflect the diversity of the community.
Her documentary First Vote looked at how the Asian community was divided by the 2016 election and the importance of voting to increase Asian voter turnout.
After seeing how the 2016 election has divided the Asian American voters, I was interested in finding out why Asian American voters, especially first-time voters, why do they vote the way they do? And it's also for me as a first-time voter to understand more about American democracy, about voting, about civic engagement.
First Vote has won the Special Jury Award for Art and Craft of Documentary Form and has screened in several film festivals, including at AFI Silver Theater.
It really is a dream come true to have my film screen at AFI Silver. Asian Americans are the fastest growing population in the country, and 15% of Montgomery County residents are Asian Americans. So it's really great to have the film screen at AFI Silver in Montgomery County to reach, Asian American viewers.
Have you ever heard of a platform called Twitch? If you haven't, now might be a good time to check it out. Charity Chuan, also known as DJ Accurate, spins on this online platform, joining a growing list of DJs streaming their music live.
I know a lot of people are very familiar with mainstream music, mainstream DJs through the radio and through YouTube and everything like that, but there's definitely a big population of music and a population of artists that are not getting exposed, and I would one day want to have a big enough community, big enough following where I am in a position to kind of share that music and people can, get a feel for what else is out there besides what the radio is putting out there to them.
DJ Accurate primarily spins hip-hop, reggae, and classics, but any chance he gets to play Cambodian music, he takes it.
I was spinning for a fundraiser for the film In the Life of Music. In that fundraiser, I wanted, since it was a Cambodian film, I wanted to incorporate some Cambodian music. So I solicited for some Cambodian artists, things that my mom used to listen to, things that are current now. So I was able to spin some of that at that fundraiser, which was a very interesting experience. As a DJ, one of the biggest things that I enjoy doing is, getting people together, allowing an atmosphere that people can have a good time, listen to good music, share that experience with each other.
Oishi Ghosh learned to dance before she could walk. A second-generation Indian American, she has been immersed in Indian classical dance for close to 13 years.
It started from my mother. She always wanted to do dance when she was very young. And so the first time she took me to a dance performance, my eyes immediately lit up. I was so excited. The movements were so exciting to me. I would see them do these beautiful hand gestures and I would think, wow, if only I could do that.
Oishi, now a high school student at Walt Whitman High School, uses her love for dance to explore her identity as an Indian American and address the misconceptions about her culture.
I think when I was younger, I was really quiet about my heritage because there would be incidents at school where I wouldn't really fit in. When I would say, this is what I do at home, or this is what I wear sometimes. I didn't feel like, I was part of my peers. But as I danced more, I really got more comfortable with who I was as an Indian American. I absolutely love spreading my culture to the people I know. Through my dance and through education, through that, I can teach people, that Indian classical dance is not just dance, it's meditation, it's an art form, it's so much more than that. I dance because it brings me joy. Whenever I feel down, I always look forward to dancing with my teachers my friends, or just practicing by myself.
Oshi is a rising exponent of Odyssey, a 1,000-year-old form of Indian classical dance, and Cho, an almost extinct form of Indian folk dance.
What I want to do is really spread Cho all around. I want to show people that, you know, it's present, it's here, and I want to show the beauty of it. When I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of representation. I didn't have people on TV that looked like me. I didn't have people dancing that looked like me as much. So to dance in more diverse areas, not just, you know, going to like an Indian event, is really what I want to aim at, because I want to show the young brown girls there that, you know, there's someone there who does, you know, dance and does everything.
When we think of Indian music, we often expect to hear the contemporary Bollywood sounds. Nishtha Raj, however, offers a different flavor to Indian music with an instrument she met when she was only 9 years old.
I started playing violin in the after-school program when I was in the 5th grade, and it was just sort of something my best friend at the time wanted to do, and she thought it'd be fun for us to do it together. When I started playing the violin, I just instantly connected with it. The idea of having a vehicle to express my feelings and also a place to retreat when the world got too crazy and just enjoy that. It was something that really gave me a lot of solace and a space for me to feel safe.
To immerse herself in Indian music and culture, following her college graduation, Nishtha traveled to India to study the oldest form of Indian classical music, Drupad.
It was also a really beautiful experience for me. It really taught me a lot about myself, life, and just being able to be absorbed in that music that I was so desperate to like absorb myself, just being in the root of it all, and the culture and connecting with my own heritage was a very special point in my life.
Nishtha is also known for her skills in blending Western and Eastern music with a mix of beatbox, jazz, and rock, which isn't something we are used to hearing in Indian classical music. Her ability to mix Eastern classical music with modern sounds would serve her well when she joined the Strathmore Artist in Residence program in 2013.
Part of the program is to collaborate with your co-artist in residence, so that was a very great experience because my music, for me, you know, I write and compose music that's rooted in Indian classical, but really I feel most connected to when I'm creating music that brings in different genres and collaboration with other artists. So that experience at Strathmore was sort of another opportunity for me to really explore those intersections and, you know, that part of my music as well.
Through collaboration in the arts, these individuals are leading the way in helping shape the future of their communities.
That was beautiful. I want to acknowledge that Uri Fu, Chao Tian, Doyle Song, Maudan Nguyen, Nishtha Raj, Oshi Ghosh, and DJ Akurit are all in the audience today. Let's give them another round of applause. Next, we will be hearing brief comments from all of my colleagues. First, we will start with Vice President Glass, and then colleagues, we're going to then go to Councilmember Navarro and make our way down the dais this way. So, Council Vice President Glass.
Good morning, everybody. What an inspiring video. A great way to start our day here at the Council, highlighting the beautiful and powerful art that so many in the community continue to create and share with all of us, whether it's meditative, musical, visual, fashion, film, and dance. I just want to applaud all of you for sharing your talents with us. And also for those of you who are joining us today, leaders in government and business and philanthropy, thank you for being an integral part of Montgomery County and being part of the inclusive and beautiful network that we have here. And I'll just say that it is good to be with all of you physically, I think the last time we collectively got together, it was for a different occasion, and it was to recognize that there was hate and racism that had been inflicted upon the AAPI community, and we all came together here in Montgomery County to say no, and to say that we don't tolerate that. And so it is 1 year later, when some of that has waned, today we're able to celebrate the incredible work that each of you and members of the AAPI community do to make Montgomery County a wonderful and beautiful place to live, work, and play. So thank you all for being here, and I look forward to today's celebration.
Thank you, Council Vice President Glass. Next, we will hear from Councilmember Navarro.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is so wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces that I got to meet via this extraordinary video. I am just, my heart is full. The reality is that Montgomery County in many ways is like a wonderful experiment. It is a place that is home to folks that speak over 160 languages. And to me, what was really wonderful about this video and the theme is that art specifically is such an amazing vehicle of expression, the expression of tradition, the expression of unity. It is a way to honor our ancestors. It is a way to unify us in a moment in time historically where we know there's been a lot of division, a lot of differences, a lot of pain. And I love the fact that this video really truly included classical forms of art, but also the young generation that is stepping forward to then unite this very important classical foundational pieces of our collective heritage and blending that forward so that it's not lost, but it also represents that bridge. And so for me, it's just wonderful. I was sitting here just reminiscing of, I was a 17-year-old young woman coming to Columbia, Missouri, 1983, to go to college. And at first, I told my parents that I wanted to go to New York or California, and they said, no, you're going to Missouri where we know some folks. And I thought, I'll just transfer later on. But I stayed. And the reason I stayed is because it had such an extraordinary, diverse student body. And I just immersed myself in all these different cultures, and which is why I chose specifically Montgomery County to raise my two daughters with my husband, because I knew that Montgomery County represented that kind of space, that community. And so I want to thank you, because it is a very diverse community, but here you are collectively united to show that we need to continue to have hope. We need to continue to believe in our future. We need to understand that we've gone through some very difficult times that has changed the world, in my opinion, permanently, but that opens opportunities. And that is why this county in particular is just such a wonderful, unique place. So thank you for all your contributions. Thank you for your collaboration. Thank you so much for being part of this amazing place.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Councilmember Friedson.
Well, thank you so much. Good morning. I am so excited to be here, so proud to be a Montgomery County resident, to live in a place that has such an incredible and accomplished and giving AAPI community, the largest AAPI community anywhere in the state of Maryland. And I'm proud, we're all proud of that fact. And watching the video, we see from arts and culture, food and music and dance. We think of education. We think of business and technology. We think of politics. We have three trailblazing elected officials here with us today, Chairman Barvey, Senator Lee, and Delegate Chi, all of whom have made history in their own rights. And we think of all of the nonprofit leaders, all of the business leaders, all of those who have given back so richly and so incredibly to make Montgomery County the wonderful place that it is. And thinking back on the pandemic, and there have been some really challenging times, the story of the AAPI community through this pandemic in many ways has been the story of the AAPI community throughout the history of our country, facing some of the worst forms of discrimination, some of the greatest challenges facing any community, facing any individual groups, and how our AAPI community rose above it when we think of the anti-Asian hate and some of the really ugly situations, then you think about the way that our AAPI community was one of the first groups, one of the first communities to come together and to help us get PPE, to fight this pandemic together as a community that stood together and set up testing sites and set up food distribution sites and set up places for our residents to get social safety net services that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to access. How our AAPI community and we worked together to make sure that we expanded security grants to provide cultural organizations with this type of protection that was needed at a time where we were facing really ugly and unacceptable forms of hatred and of bigotry. So I'm just so proud to celebrate with you all of the accomplishments and particularly to come out of these past 2 years, a year of great challenge, but a year that demonstrates the way that our AAPI community has led the way in many ways for our broader community to rise above those challenges. So thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you do, and I am so excited to be part of this wonderful celebration here together.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Friedson. Now, Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Council President. Great to see so many longtime friends here. I always learn so much from these videos, so thanks so much to Murchai on our team for putting that amazing one together to highlight so many residents that I think otherwise we wouldn't have known about. My experience at many of these events, and all of us have been to a lot of AAPI heritage events, right? People always refer to the great diversity of the AAPI community. So many nationalities, national origins, so many languages. And that can be an advocacy challenge. I remember working with Senator Lee to get the O'Malley administration to declare Lunar New Year a holiday as a way to bring communities together to push for AAPI issues in the State House, because that was one holiday everybody agreed on. I'm just struck sitting here looking at so many longtime friends at the diversity, by the diversity of your contributions. I mean, we have leaders of our business community here, leaders of our economic development community, and our higher education community, our education and higher education community, state lawmakers who have been incredible advocates for gun safety recently, and human trafficking prevention, and the environment, and climate protection, and small business development, and as well. It's extraordinary the collective contributions that you all are making every single day to our county and to our state. And I love celebrations like this because we get to talk about those, and we don't get to talk about them enough. So thanks for everything you're doing. And I really hope we have a lot of residents paying attention today, because you all really deserve a lot of credit for the extraordinary contributions you're making, and so many unsung heroes like we saw, the ones we saw in the video, are making every single day to our county. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Hucker. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Well, indeed, it's an honor to be with you today, and wonderful to see Senator Barvey, Chairman Barvey.
Cheryl just fainted.
Senator Lee, Delegate Chi. It's great to be with you. It's great to be with you. Apologies. First words I've muttered in a few minutes here. It was exciting to see the cultural creators, the ways that traditions are being expressed and developed, and new interpretations and new blends. I thought that was really intriguing, and of course we see it in the community around us today. But I've learned about some new exciting artists and some entrepreneurs, and I want to get a photo with your company, the Enemies Forever. Show it to my son. He's going to be pretty excited to see and learn about your company. I want to thank each of you and collectively for your impact. Your communities are high impact communities in this county, and you're powering our successes in life sciences and technology and entrepreneurship and government, and agencies like NIH are powered by your contributions. And as has been mentioned, our success in a community response during this terrible pandemic, but also a governmental response during this pandemic has been so much through your efforts. We are really grateful. The care that you provide for our seniors and the work that you do to at the grassroots level, your nonprofits, your small businesses, you are at the forefront of what is good and the progress in Montgomery County. And we're just pleased to be able to honor you and delighted for this tradition, because there's never been a more important time for us to have strong bonds. And I think we've seen through these difficult times that having pre-existing partnerships and pre-existing relationships so that in a moment of crisis you can quickly provide resources and expand and deepen the work that needs to be done is so important. So thank you for being with us, and we're really look forward to deepening and building on our relationships going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. You can say good morning back. Yeah. Really good to see you. This is such an awesome event, and I think agree with all my colleagues. You know, the best part about Montgomery County is who we are, and when we come together, you know, there's so many stories about how we all got here, and I think it's always important to remember we all got here somehow, whether we were brought here, whether we immigrated here, whether we fled violence, whether it was our grandparents or us or our parents or our great-grandparents, we all got here somehow. And in Montgomery County, we have really been about the work, not perfectly, but how do you come together as a very diverse community where everyone can achieve their potential and contribute to our society? And I think there are not many places in the United States, and I've been to many, studied many more, that have what we have here. I always see my good friend, and it's always dangerous mentioning people in the audience, but I'm gonna single out Senator Susan Lee because she has been a trailblazer along with so many others here. But we often talk about when we were having the horrible discrimination, the Asian hate, we were having so many forms of hate at once, right? As a reaction to this big lie that we can't all come together and do well. That is the big lie. We can, and we should, and we have at our best. But she talked about particularly the kinship between the African American and the Asian community, and we built this country, right? We built the country, literally laid the foundation of buildings and railroads, and indeed May was chosen in 1992, long overdue, by Congress as Asian American Pacific Islander Month because that was the anniversary of the ending of the Transcontinental Railroad, right? And because that was the month that the first Japanese Americans in 1843 immigrated to the United States. I had the great privilege and honor, and I want to highlight them, to visit one of the Japanese library collection with Mr. Takamori and folks. And if they're here, I'd like to ask you to stand, give them a little, I see you there. Okay. Thank you. They have collected over the years over 15,000 Japanese language books that when I went to visit, there were kids, adults, you had every range coming in there sharing their culture. And, you know, Maya Angelou said this, many other people have said it, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've come from. And I think this commemoration by the team was just so awesome. And I just want to say happy AAPI Heritage Month, and I'm proud to live in a county where we value the importance and contributions of everybody. So God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone. You know, when you're the eighth speaker, I guess, of this crowd, most of what could be said has been said, but you know, these events are just so wonderful, and the video and everything else. But Asian American and Pacific Islanders Heritage Month is a time to recognize that the many contributions that the AAPI community has made to our history and to our culture. And that's both worldwide and locally, as we saw in the video. We celebrate in May, I did a little research myself, we celebrate in May because it commemorates the immigration of the first Japanese people to the United States on May 7th, 1843. And as many of you have heard me say, and I know my colleagues have heard me say probably more times than they would like me to, I sincerely believe a community is a family. And I'm so very proud that all of our family members, or many of our family members, are here today. And it is dangerous to look around the room and call out people, but I really believe that it's necessary to mention that I see former Board of Education member Dr. Alan Chung, who was the first person in the AAPI community to be elected in Montgomery County. Could we please have Dr. Chung stand? Dr. Chung has taken on a role that, for me, both of being a mentor and a friend, and for many years, and I sincerely appreciate it. He's already been mentioned, but my District 17 delegate, Kumar Barvey, is here, along with Senator Susan Lee and Delegate Lily Chi. I sincerely enjoy teasing Kumar, and I take every opportunity to do that. And I'm also very pleased to see a person who I've just recently gotten to know, and that's Julie Yang. And I appreciate everything that she is doing for our community. And one other person I did want to mention is Yi Shen, who worked at my office and is now the Asian liaison for the Office of Community Partnerships. And Yi, if you would like to stand, I know the community knows you. And oh, by the way, not to ruin the theme, but I enjoy teasing him as well. So, but thank you, everyone, for everything that you do for our community. It is truly you have helped make all of us a better community for all of us, and we sincerely thank you for your numerous contributions each and every day. Thank you. With that, I turn back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Katz. Next, we will hear from Councilmember Rice. After Councilmember Rice finishes his remarks, we will all come forward and invite all of our guests to come forward, and then we will hear from some leaders in our AAPI community. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and greetings to everybody that's there. I wish I could be with you in person. Unfortunately, I'm at a conference in Houston, Texas, but this was very important to me, and I wanted to be a part of this. And I see so many of my friends, whether it's Chairman Barvey, Delegate Chi, Shruti Bhatnagar, Devang Shah, so many folks who are leaders in our community. And it ties into the theme for this year, which is advancing leaders through collaboration. Each and every one of you, and you've heard the stories from all of my colleagues on the dais, have collaborated with all of us to ensure that we're advancing the interests of our community. And our community includes our AAPI. And we need to make sure that that's at the forefront. Folks who prioritize in understanding that the only way in which we can make ourselves the family that Councilmember Katz talked about is by making sure that leaders bring forth the issues that are so important. So when I think about our Asian American Health Initiative that continues to ensure that we're highlighting stigmatized things like mental health and continue to bring them to the forefront. When it comes to making sure that educational opportunities are there in our schools so that everyone can succeed and continue to be successful and compete at the highest levels. All of those things are incredibly important to the fabric of what it is that we call Montgomery County. And that is why our AAPI community is so important, because we all contribute to making sure that we have this incredible tapestry that is, the Montgomery County family that we know. And so I just want to close by saying thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for continuing to fight for those who are marginalized and oftentimes forgotten. There are so many assumptions that are made about our AAPI community, and you continue to dispel those myths each and every day. That's incredibly important. Understanding the diversity of the culture, understanding that people struggle in all of our facets of our communities. And we need to continue to provide support and lift folks up when they need a helping hand. And also when it comes to economic development and making sure that whether it's small businesses and entrepreneurs and supporting them and giving them the opportunities to be successful, which also means hiring folks in our community. And last but not least our kids, making sure that our kids have a place that they can go to school and not be discriminated against, to make sure that they can focus on learning. Those are all things that each and every one of you work on each and every day. It is what makes Montgomery County one of the best places to live, work, and play. And so I just want to say thank you for all of your great work. Back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Before we all collect, I want to acknowledge that Ashima Talwar is here from Senator Van Hollen's office. Thank you so much. Now, colleagues and guests, please come forward in front of the dais, and we will hear some remarks from respected leaders.
Alan, come on up.
All right, we're going to need a wide angle here. So we will next hear from first Senator Susan Lee, then State Delegate Lily Chi, then State Delegate Kumar Barvey, and then Devang Shaw. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Senator Lee, and as was noted earlier by colleagues, she is a trailblazer in every way imaginable. And I have a special connection to Senator Lee because my parents live in her district. They are thrilled to be represented by somebody who speaks their values and understands their complex and unique background as immigrants. And so I can't thank Senator Lee. And she's, by the way, taken a lot of time to mentor many of us, including myself, in so many different ways. So Senator Lee, please, it's an honor to have you say some comments.
Thank you, President Albornoz, and thank you for your extraordinary leadership in the helm of the council, and Vice Chair Glass, too, and all the wonderful council members who represent us every day on very difficult, complex issues. We're very proud of you, and we are here to help and partner with you from the state. I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and also the council doing this AAPI Heritage Month celebration. It's very special to all of us, but we especially thank you for honoring all the artists. They've always been not recognized. It's more in the science and technology. As you know, Asian Americans, the parents always tell you to become doctors or engineers, right? So I'm so glad you're finally recognizing the artists. My own mother is an artist, and she worked in the art department at the Washington Post for 1,000 years. She enjoyed it. So thank you for honoring artists. They've contributed enormously to our real wonderful cultural diversity. But I'd like to say thank you for this celebration because, the history of America is incomplete without telling the history of all our people of all different backgrounds, which has not always been the case in our country. Very often, communities of color and other underrepresented communities have been marginalized. And a month like this just highlights our significant contributions because, as Council Member Joanna said, very often we're never recognized. But our different communities of color have built America, from building the railroads to innovations in science and technology, medical treatments, the arts, right? Sports, and all sorts of things from, launching I would say, information technology revolution. And also in politics, too, with my wonderful colleagues here, like Delegate Kumar Barvey, who was the first Asian American and South Asian to be elected to the Maryland General Assembly. And in our other colleagues, too, now we're strong. We actually have an Asian American Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. Yeah. And I was honored to serve as its first chair. Now we have Clarence Lamb, Senator Lamb, who's now the chair of that wonderful entity. And we have collaborated as a caucus with the Black Caucus, the Latino Caucus, and a Women's Caucus, because together, moving forward, we're able to deliver more to our communities. But as I said, we've made significant contributions. ever since we landed on the soil of this wonderful country. And, we've served in the United States military in many wars, dating back to the Civil War. My own father was a United States Navy World War II veteran who served on the Atlantic and Pacific. He was part of what they call the Greatest Generation. And I had uncles in the Vietnam War. And we've also had many other, we've heard of Nathan Chin. Have you all heard of Nathan Chin? He's a gold medalist. I think I'm getting it right. And then there's, I don't want to talk forever because there's so many achievements that have been made by our community, but the contributions have been marginalized. And then our community faced a horrible anti-Asian rhetoric that was fueled by the past president and the profiling of innocent scientists of Chinese descent that's hurt scientists. But we've all, overcome that. And as the council members have mentioned, we were the first community to offer PPEs and give it to the community and our frontline workers. And so I'm not going to go on because I know the colleagues have to speak too, but I'm so proud to be with you all today, to be part of this rich tapestry of America. And together, let's work together so we could fulfill the promise of America. And thank you so much for honoring us.
Next, I'm proud to introduce Delegate Lily Chi, who I had the honor of serving in the cabinet with of previous County Executive Ike Leggett. Delegate Chi.
Good morning and a happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Thank you so much for taking the time on a Tuesday morning to join all of us. And I want to give a big shout out to Council President, my friend and former colleague in Montgomery County Government, Council President Gabe Albernas and Vice President Evan Glass and all of the council members for taking the time to honor our cultural heritage and honor who we are as an integral part of Montgomery County. Last night, as I was watching late night, as I was watching the news unfold of this leaked document from the Supreme Court that threatened to take a fundamental right of American women away from modern American women in the 21st century, I was pinching myself thinking how lucky we are to be part of Maryland. And today I feel how lucky we are to be part of Montgomery County, because after the last 2 years, we just cannot take a welcoming community for granted anymore. And so thank all of you for making this part of a wonderful community. And I especially love the fact that you've highlighted the arts as theme. As Senator Lee said, that we are creative people too, with personalities, right? We are full-dimensional human beings just like anyone else, So thank you. And as someone who's married to a musician who grew up in a family where we sing along to a mom's organ tune because she was a lifelong elementary school music teacher in Shanghai, I love it. That's wonderful. But and especially when you see the music, the traditional music and the modern music and traditional, Chinese or Indian or whatever music is blended with modern American jazz, whatever. That is how cultures are made, right? This Montgomery County is a metaphor of that, is a manifestation of that. But I have to say personally, the ultimate epitome of integration is political involvement. Please vote, because when we vote, our voices matter. And because you have representations here, this year for the first time, the State Board of Election will have multilingual voter registration forms on its website in PDF forms, complete with instruction. It's because you have Asian representations in Maryland State Legislature. And because you have Asian representations, and Delegate Barvey will speak to that too, this year for the first time, we require MCPS to separate the student performance tracking. So Asian Americans are no longer lumped with whites and all others, because representation matters. So please vote, including and especially in the primary election. So thank you, and happy Asian American Heritage Month.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from State Delegate Kumar Barvey. As you heard earlier, he has been himself a trailblazer in so many ways, and we're fortunate to have him representing us in the General Assembly. Delegate Barvey.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and to the Council. There are so many accomplishments of our community, whether it's building the railway. My grandfather came here to be a research scientist for General Electric, to be one of the many people who developed TV technology. So if your kids are doing poorly in school, it's because of the Well, part of the contribution of my grandfather so they could slack off and watch a little screen. Seriously, though, you'll see an incredible diversity here, not only in our life backgrounds and what we do for a living and artistic backgrounds and what could possibly unite us. So I will tell you that my father, my late father, used to complain that the only thing that truly united the Asian American community was our insane devotion to lunar calendars. And oh, you can laugh. Come on, we have a sense of humor. But really, I think what really unites this group of people, whether we're elected office holders or artists or aspiring business people or whatever, is the belief that we have in ourselves in this community. I'd like to call up Alan Chung. Alan, why don't you come up here for a second and join me? Back in 1990, he and I were the first Asian Americans to run for and win elective office in Montgomery County. And if you remember, there were a lot of people who questioned whether a guy like you or a guy like me could possibly even win an election. Do you remember that?
Well, at the time, majority of the population is not diverse.
Yeah, but we had faith in ourselves, and we had faith in our place in Montgomery County, Maryland, and it allowed us, we became trailblazers to a great extent because we believed in ourselves, and also to a great extent because this is a community that allows us to believe in ourselves. And so, I was the first Indian American, the first Hindu to be elected to any state legislature in American history. He was the first Asian American to be elected countywide in Montgomery County. Actually, weren't you the first countywide elected office holder in Maryland history?
Chinese American.
Okay, that's right. And so I want to thank you all for coming together and giving us this opportunity to celebrate the fact that we do believe in ourselves, but it's important to remember that it's easy to believe in yourself if you live in Montgomery County. Thank you so much.
And also, Kumar, we Asian Pacific American have more than one culture.
That's right.
And that's the reason that we try to apply the best of our cultures. And we believe not what people say, what people do.
That's right. That's right.
In America, we have many, many good talkers, very, very few doers. And you have to watch what they do and what the results are. And also, we believe in education, in characters, in respect of elders and family. If you want to look at the politicians, see how they respect their elders, then you know how great their leader will be.
That's right.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of doers, our final guest speaker this morning is Devang Shah. Devang has served as the chair of the board of Interfaith Works, but has also been involved in so many different community-based organizations across our community. He's a tremendous leader, and we're proud to have him here this morning.
Thank you so much for everyone. Is this on? Yeah. Thank you for everyone so much for coming, and thank you, President Albanese, Vice President Glass. I saw a statistic up there that said there are 156,000 Asian Americans in Montgomery County, and that just doesn't happen by accident. It's because we have a county council, we have a state delegation that is truly inclusive and welcoming, and that's why we get increasing number of Asian Americans that want to come to our county, and it wasn't always that way. I'm a lifelong resident of Montgomery County, and many people tell me I didn't get very far in life. My kids went to the same middle school, elementary school, and high school as I did. And I remember my first day at elementary school, oldest child of an immigrant mother and father, and I went to school with Indian food. And there was this green chutney there, if you guys know what chutney is, and all the kids said, "Oh my God, he's eating grass." In first grade, I was known as the boy that ate grass. Not a very inclusive environment that I grew up in here, and it was a little difficult, right? Fast forward about 35 years, and my 3 daughters, I come home, and I see them in the family room with their friends, and there's a Latina friend, and an African American, and another Asian American, and a Jewish and white, and they're all playing dress up with Indian clothes and dancing to Bollywood music and eating snack food my wife made, tandoori chicken. And it brings tears to my eyes because Montgomery County had become that family community that that the council member had talked about, Sydney. And so it's so wonderful to have such great elected representatives and community leaders that have made this community truly inclusive, where we can all enjoy each other's cultures, art, etc., and make it a much nicer place to live in. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Javan. Next, we will see a brief, 2-minute video from U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai, and then my colleagues and I will formally read the proclamation together. Cue up the video, please.
Hello, everyone. First, let me extend my gratitude to the Montgomery County Council for inviting me to join today's event and celebration. I am a daughter of Montgomery County, and I am delighted to be with you today as I serve in President Biden's cabinet and as co-chair of the White House Initiative and the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. This year's theme for the Montgomery County Council's 2022 AAPI Month proclamation is Advancing Leaders Through Collaboration in the Arts. It is a perfect theme to celebrate the outstanding achievements and contributions of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, whose creativity entertains, challenges, and inspires all of us. By honoring AA-NHPI representation in the arts, you are highlighting role models for younger generations to follow. Beyond that, the proclamation is a reminder about how our community needs to remain engaged at the local, statewide, and national level. I think about the fact that I am the first Asian American confirmed to serve as United States Trade Representative. While it's not easy being the first, I hope that I can inspire and guide the next generation of female Asian Americans towards public service. As Vice President Kamala Harris, who is also Asian American, says, and I'll paraphrase, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. The Council's proclamation makes clear that members of the AA-NHPI community are seen and respected in Montgomery County. It is a demonstration of inclusivity that I hope is replicated in communities across the United States. To the Montgomery County Council, thank you for your leadership on this important issue. And once again, thank you for inviting me to be a part of today's event.
That was perfect. Next, I will invite my colleagues and I to read the proclamation together. I will start. So, Proclamation of Montgomery County, Maryland. Whereas Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month is recognized nationally throughout the month of May to honor the irreplaceable roles that these communities have played in our past and to celebrate the contributions made by generations of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to American history, society, and culture. And whereas
Whereas Montgomery County residents of Asian and Pacific Islander heritage come from all parts of Asia and the Pacific Islands of Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. And
whereas more than 161,600 county residents identify themselves as Asian American and Pacific Islanders, which represents more than 15% of our population, and they hail from 37 different countries of origin around the world. And
whereas as one of the most culturally and linguistically diverse groups in America, the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities remind us that while we all have distinct backgrounds and origins, we share the same hopes and aspirations for ourselves and our community. And
whereas, in commemorating this month, we recognize the rich heritage of our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities who creatively express their unique identities through the creative arts to provide more representation for future generations. And
whereas this year's Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month theme is Advancing Leaders Through Collaboration in the Arts in Film, Dance, Music, and other forms of art. And
I'm sorry. That's okay. Do you want to hold the sacred book? The sacred book is so important. Whereas Asian American and Pacific Islander artists are using their voice to make a difference in their communities by expressing their culture and heritage through film, dance, music, and other forms of art. And
whereas Asian American and Pacific Islander trailblazers are succeeding each day to help shape the county's future and add their voices and experiences to make our community a better place to live, work, and raise a family. And
together, whereas together we recommit ourselves to embrace the diversity that enriches our county and to ensure that all people have an equal opportunity to succeed.
Now, therefore, it be resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby recognizes May as Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, presented on this third day of May in the year 2022. Let's give everybody a round of applause. And we're now going to take a couple of group pictures.
make sure you get my good side.
All right, thank you all so much. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next item on our agenda. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. That was beautiful. All right. Thank you all so much. We now move on to our general business. Madam Clerk, are there any announcements or changes to the agenda?
Good morning, Council President, Council Vice President, Council members. We have just one announcement of an agenda change for item J. It's the introduction, suspension of rules, action for the extension of appointment for the Acting Director, Department of Environmental Protection, Adriana Hochberg, until October 31st, 2022. The lead sponsor is the Council President at the request of the County Executive. No petitions were received by the Council this week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. The Clerk has circulated the minutes of the closed session on April 5th. Are there any changes? Hearing no changes, those minutes are approved. We next move on to we next move on to a work session, item number 2. This is a follow-up to our continued discussion regarding the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan. Helping to staff this morning, we have Ms. Dunn, Ms. Nadeau, and Dr. Orlin. I'll turn it over to the Chair of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, Chairman Reamer, to make some opening comments.
All right, thank you. we are going to work our way through the various transportation, public facilities, and fiscal impact provisions of the plan, and then return to the land use and zoning elements. And I won't really preface with any comments, so we can just get to it here. I'm trying to pull up the packet here. Seems not to have my browser. So why don't you, I will, as we've done before, we'll kind of do this back and forth with staff, and then colleagues will let the council president know if they wish to make a comment. All right. Pam, start with you. Okay.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I just a little heads up on how we are going to handle this. Is slightly different than the other two work sessions we've had. You are finishing the recommendations, plan-wide recommendations today, and there will be a few property-specific recommendations requests that came in during the Fed committee review. You'll hear those. Following that, there was an addendum sent out with very brief summary of all the recommendations and sections that you've previously reviewed during work sessions 1 and 2. So what we're going to do in kind of real time, as you hear the plan-wide recommendations for the sections you have not yet covered, we will pause to take those straw votes then, so we don't have to repeat them at the end of this work session. Then we get through all the new material plus straw votes, we'll turn to the addendum and then go through and take the straw votes on the committee recommendations that you've reviewed in work sessions 1 and 2, so that by the end of this work session today, in work session number 3, you will have completely reviewed and straw voted the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan. And this will allow staff to start really working on and getting prepared for the community and for you the resolution that notes all the changes to the planning board draft. That turns to Dr. Orland.
Good morning. We'll cover the transportation and public schools aspect of the plan first. However, we have the fiscal impact statement from the county executive, which is of course required by state law. And the calculation by the executive branch is that the plan, as recommended, would cost $707 million over the course of the lifetime of the plan. This is in terms of capital expenditures. In the review of this, we found that perhaps that was a little higher than what it really would be, given some other decisions the committee has now made, or at least recommendations they made, as well as some other factors. But nevertheless, it's still an extraordinary expensive plan. And now, can I just make a comment on that, Glenn? Traditionally, master plans make, I think, public facilities recommendations that are very tightly correlated to what the additional development capacity is that is allowed in the plan. And I think this is a different approach. I think basically we've received public facilities recommendations that are a comprehensive presentation of everything that could be great for downtown Silver Spring, and does not necessarily correspond to specific transportation impacts, although the school impacts I think are tightly corresponded. But on the transportation side, there's a lot of this is about making Silver Spring a spectacular downtown area. So the cost of that infrastructure exceeds what you would normally see. We pared that back significantly at the county, at the committee, but our planners have presented a lot of different ideas about what Silver Spring how it could change over time, and it will be up to the county to decide what can actually be afforded. So, thanks. As far as the transportation elements of the plan, I'm just going to highlight the committee's recommendations. For the Jessup Blair Metro Station, the committee recommends unanimously not referring to or not mentioning a potential for a metro station at that location.
That location is within sight of the Silver Spring Metro, so it's right. Practically within sight of the Tacoma Metro. So just didn't seem like a worthy $250 million expenditure.
The committee did recommend that the plan refer to upgraded transit along Georgia Avenue, coming out from the district up to the Silver Spring Metro Station.
All right.
With a stop at Jessup Blair Park. Pardon me? Yeah, we need a straw vote on that, on each of these items. Do you want to do it that way, or do you want to go through all of the items?
Say that?
We need straw votes on each of these items. Do you want to do that at the end?
I think we come back at the end, yeah.
Okay, all Non-auto driver mode share, at the end of my presentation, that is, before we get to the abreast. The non-auto driver mode share, the plan had recommended 60% of a merged mode share, which is both residents living in Silver Spring as well as commuters going to Silver Spring. That 60% would be arriving by means other than driving a single occupant vehicle. The committee recommends that percentage be 65%. The plan also recommends that there be bridges across or connections across the railroad tracks in a couple locations in the in Silver Spring CBD, which don't exist today. A major one from the end of Silver Spring Avenue over to East West Highway, and another in the north end connecting to the Falklands. The committee recommends approving that. However, there is a plan to there was in the plan the recommendation to rebuild the bridge from Jessup Blair Park over to Montgomery College, and the committee recommended against doing that. The bridge is not particularly old and can service bikes and peds pretty well.
That's an existing bridge. It's relatively new, and that's the one we got for a long time to come.
Right. I should add, for the other two connections, DOT had recommended that the 3 bullets on page 4 be included in the plan as conditions of those crossings, and the committee recommended approving including that language in the plan as well. As far as Colza Road north of downtown, the plan had recommended retaining the master plan 120-foot right-of-way that exists. Well, it doesn't exist, but is planned in current plans now. The current right-of-way is between 85 and a couple of places 100 feet. The committee concurred with that, although in the area north of Noyes Lane up to Sligo Creek Parkway, the plan would not amend that section. It would leave it, would not mention anything about that section in the plan. So that'll be taken up in the upcoming Silver Spring Communities Plan. In terms of green loops and other bikeways, the Fed Committee recommended concurring with all the recommendations in the plan by the Planning Board. As far as then skipping ahead to page 9, the street through Garage 4. There's been some discussion about this in the committee, in the council up to this point. The council has already more or less discussed this to some degree, and has basically what we're suggesting here is that the language on page 39 of the plan be revised to take out the reference to the fact that it needs to align with the existing private street that runs between Sligo Avenue, between Silver Spring Avenue and Thayer Avenue. So at the bottom of page 9 and top of page 10 is the language that we're recommending there.
Okay, so that was how we finessed it with the width of the street and the impacts, the potential impacts.
It still would allow for redevelopment of that garage, but it doesn't put as much restrictions on how that connection is made as what the plan had called for.
Okay.
On Newell Street, the committee concurred that Newell Street between East West Highway and Kennett Street, a very short block, should be classified as a shared street. But the plan should include language explaining the design and operational features of a shared street, and it should be accompanied with an illustrative plan. The planning staff recommends the language that you see on the top of page 11 and underlines. It basically describes more specifically what a shared street is, and includes a diagram. It's illustrative. It's not saying it necessarily will be exactly what's shown, but on Circle 25 you'll see an illustrative view of what a shared street might look like in that location. And that concludes the transportation portion of the plan, so I guess this would be a good point to see if there's a straw vote in favor of these recommendations from the committee.
All right, last, just to reiterate, we're all very excited about what the Newell Street, and our recommendation is intended to support the continued use of Newell Street as essentially a park, and to consider options to rebuild it in a way that is very flexible so that it would work optimally as a park. It's in between an existing local park, Acorn, and a privately owned public space at the building that's right there. There's options that we could develop to kind of combine them all and use that area in a different way at different times of the day. So, there's continuing work ahead in order to bring that idea to reality. But generally speaking, we're looking to continue to use this as a public space for people.
Councilmember Hucker has a question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been very vocal about my gratitude for the activation of Newell Street, we've been considering expanded park options in South Silver Spring for years. So I think it's been a great addition to the community. I support the Fed Committee's recommendation, but I really would I'm grateful to Jacob Newman and Carson Henry for the recent efforts they've made to accommodate the concerns that we've heard from the residents of Argent Apartments. And I just want to remind everybody to, in the future, while we want to have more activation of that park and it's used by people all in that South Silver Spring area, we want to assiduously reach out to the residents there and their tenant association to make sure their needs are met as well. Thank you.
That's absolutely right. And if I could just use this as an excuse to make a shameless plug for our capital budget, it's essential that during reconciliation that we are able to retain the money in some of those level of effort accounts in order so that we can proceed and make room for things like the NTB site and facility planning for some of these parks, including the ones in South Silver Spring, for Jessup Blair. All these things are going to create the opportunity to expand those same kinds of opportunities, not just at Newell Street, but elsewhere, and take a little bit of the pressure off of that particular small park at Acorn.
Thank you, Chairman Anderson.
Well, can I just add?
Yep, please.
Well, in that area, I know since we're on Glenn's portion here in transportation, I did want to also thank you for the increased connectivity that's envisioned with the bridges there as well. That's reflected years of requests from residents of that community. It's always been a problem connecting South Silver Spring to the rest of Silver Spring and to the amenities in the downtown. And I heard that many times when I was first door knocking those buildings, when I was a fresh-faced delegate, and Councilmember Glass was providing enlightened, benevolent leadership to the neighborhood association there. And there's tens of thousands of residents that live there that didn't even live there then, that live there now that didn't live there then. So they're going to benefit from your vision on this, and I think it's a real enhancement. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have gone through the series of items. Chairman Reamer, I think, or do you believe we're ready to? I don't see any other questions or comments from colleagues. Seeing no questions or comments. Oh, please.
If I may, I have just one thing I would like to say about Garage 4 from DOT's perspective before you take the vote. While we are in agreement and appreciate the changes that have been made to the language to make the concept of the North-South Street at the redevelopment of Garage 4 more flexible, we maintain our concern about the assumption that Garage 4 will be demolished. We have very strong proposals and communication from affordable housing developers who are interested in reusing all or a portion of the garage. And while that will not necessarily be the case, the way that the language is written, we feel precludes us from the option to reuse Garage 4.
Whoa, wait a second. Come on.
What?
Hannah, please.
Yeah.
Doesn't preclude the option of reusing the garage.
Well, the language that we had suggested, which Dr. Orling can clarify, had added in that in the case that Garage 4 is demolished.
I think, well, we're all very interested and supportive of the potential idea about doing affordable housing there. So we're not seeking in any way to put language in the plan that would obstruct that. I think this idea here was, should the garage be demolished, this is what would happen. And as we discussed at the committee, I thought that why on earth would we tear down a very expensive garage? It's a public asset that can be utilized. So that's my own view of what we're doing here, is we're not taking a position on what should happen there, but we're saying if in the long run that garage comes down, this is what should replace it. So if it's true that this language would somehow prevent you, that would be a problem, but our staff says that that's not that's not the way the language reads.
And from planning standpoint, that is not the intent at all. At the bottom of page 9, it basically says that should the site redevelop, and that essentially means completely redevelop without the existing garage, the large block would have a new north-south street. So that is our understanding of the intent of this language.
Okay,
So-
thank you. I appreciate that, and that we are in agreement with the clarification.
You can certainly
and
run
that-
the tape here as to what the legislative intent is.
Yeah, and no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the clarification from everybody, and that we all have the same understanding of the goals.
Thank you, Hannah. Ms. Henn.
Councilmember Jawanda wanted to chime in.
Appreciate it. And I appreciate Ms. Wright bringing it up. If you look at the Fed committee, none of us wanted that to happen either. So I just want to make sure with staff, so this is the compromise language that we asked you all to come back with. And so encourage the redevelopment of parking garage 4 and surrounding properties through a public-private partnership with the parking lot district, okay. And then this is the line I think you referenced, Ms. Wright. The plan recommends that should the site redevelop, this large block be divided via a new north-south connection that aligns a new north-south connection, period. This connection could provide loading and service connections for the new development. In addition, the plan recommends an east-west block through pedestrian connection of a part of any redevelopment of the garage parcel. Is the concern that, because the site redeveloping could include the plans for affordable housing that you're discussing, so that then in that case the garage would stay. Right, so that's the thing that I think you're talking. Is that the concern?
When DOT read redevelop, we consider building affordable housing over an existing garage a redevelopment of the site, and perhaps that's just.
As would I. I mean,
So
but I don't know
that
if
was
that's
our
not
concern,
a technical.
That's infill, or in this case, overfill, right? If you're taking an existing property, you're not demolishing whatever's there, but you're adding to it. Usually infill means you're putting it between the existing buildings, but I say overfill because what we're talking about here is putting something on top. So that's not redevelopment. I mean, it's maybe there's no like term of art. Like,
can we say fully redevelop? Just to be extra clear.
Could I make a suggestion similar to that?
You may.
Could we just add, rather than fully, and then we get into the definition of what fully means, can we just say redevelops and the parking garage replaced? Just add
in the
language
event,
that the parking lot be replaced.
Includes the replacement
of the parking garage.
Maybe say it that way.
In the event that the parking garage is demolished.
As part of a redevelopment.
As part of redevelopment.
Just include that specific language, then there's no ambiguity here, and we don't have to go back to the legislature.
Right, we can come up with some language saying should the site redevelop, including removal of the existing parking garage.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Yeah. So
Sausage being made in real time.
There we go. I think that's what we want. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So Ms. Dunn and Ms. Nadeau, did you get that? Okay. All right. All right. Council Vice President Glass.
So I know we were just talking about the actual parking structure, but when we were talking about surrounding property as well, I don't know if Fed committee discussed it, but there are proposals to redevelop the Days Inn Motel, and one of those proposals does. They are interested in taking some of that surface parking lot. So this is not just a theoretical conversation, right? And so getting the verbiage correct is important. But I know that the community does look forward to the redevelopment of that Days Inn Motel, because in the 15 years or so when I first moved into that neighborhood, that Days Inn Motel was a problem, and it continues to be a problem. So whether whatever is done with it, and whatever affordable housing might be incorporated, whatever green space would be welcome.
And I do think there is some specific language elsewhere in the plan about the reuse of some of that parking for that project. Yes, that's a different site on Kennett Street, and it is addressed in a different part of the plan.
4. Right. Got it. You're right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. So I guess are we ready? And by the way, these are straw votes, not final votes, just to make sure our public is aware. But I don't see any other questions or comments. Are we prepared without objection then to accept the committee's recommendations with the amendment as noted by, that's been noted by council staff? Without objection then. Okay.
Okay, the only last thing I would mention is on the public schools adequacy, we did look at the long-term enrollment forecast for each of the 3 levels from the development that's proposed in Silver Spring, and we find that there will be adequate, there is certainly plausible there will be adequate capacity at all 3 levels. The one area where it's possibly short would be an elementary school capacity, but there are elementary schools in the vicinity which are vacant, one of which is Parkside, which could be redeveloped as and reopened as a new elementary school and would resolve that issue in the longer term. And so the committee found that there was no issue with adequacy for public schools.
Thank you. Without objection then.
Okay, so next we are moving to the plan-wide recommendations, which are further down in the PDF. I think they start around page 40, but it's page 13 on the bottom of the staff report. So first is resilient downtown. So the region's most direct climate hazards, of course, are extreme temperatures, increased precipitation, and drought. This section of the plan includes goals such as reducing surface and heat island temperatures, supporting the climate action plan, increasing green cover, improving air quality. So for this introduction part of resilient downtown, the committee recommends removing the reference to Thrive 2050 since it has not yet been passed by this council. I'm going to pause here, Council President. I'm not sure if you want to continue doing it by straw voting by section.
I think that would make sense. Okay. We can keep moving fluidly unless council members want to chime in with questions or comments. I think we can assume without objection.
Sounds good. So the next part of resilient downtown is environmental equity and health. So effects of climate change are often felt most acutely by low-income, elderly, and minority communities, which leads to physical, mental, and economic stress. So the recommendations include expanding parks and open space and amenities to within a 5-minute walk for residents, using the green loop, and designing parks and open spaces. And the committee unanimously agreed with those recommendations.
Without objection.
Next is urban heat islands and tree canopy. So urban heat islands occur when urban areas have warmer temperatures because there's more impervious surface and less green cover. So there are several recommendations here. If you turn to page 15 of the staff memo, you'll see the Fed Committee's recommendation. So I'm going to slow down slightly here. So the way it was in the plan, it said encourage a minimum 35% green cover. The Fed Committee was concerned that this could limit development. So the Fed Committee softened the language a bit to make it more flexible. For example, including where practical and consistent with other plan objectives, and providing a wider range of ways to achieve that green cover. Council, of course, has received a lot of testimony from residents who want to go the opposite direction and actually make these green canopy requirements stricter. Some of the recommendations the correspondence has is requiring preservation of 8% of the tree canopy in the downtown, requiring 35% green cover, and I will note here that the Bethesda overlay does require 35% green cover versus encourage. Setting an overall goal to reach 45% tree canopy over 20 years, requiring planting trees that are major trees instead of small decorative trees, and then requiring larger tree pits. So the Fed Committee recommendation was to lessen the requirement to provide flexibility for developers, and then we've received correspondence asking to go the other way, making it stricter. So I'll pause because I think there's some discussion here.
Yes, I've got Councilmember Hucker followed by Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very important topic, and I appreciate all the thoughts that have gone into it, and I realize it's a balancing act and there are some trade-offs. But we made a very clear commitment to the climate emergency that we declared unanimously. We made a very clear commitment to racial equity and social justice, and the fact that Silver Spring has less tree canopy and green cover than anywhere I've seen in the county. To me, it's consistent with our commitments to do the right thing and require, I mean, arguably, we should be requiring more than we may have done in Bethesda to catch up since we're farther behind in Silver Spring. But to me, at the very least, I like the staff recommendations, and I would like to see us make the same recommendations in Silver Spring that we made for Bethesda.
Thank you. Council Vice President Glass.
I agree with those comments, and you know, if the committee had expressed concern about redevelopment of Silver Spring based on a 35% green cover, and that is the same requirement based in Bethesda, I'm not sure there's much to be concerned about, since the conversation that's happening in Bethesda is not about lack of development. And so if it's good enough for Bethesda, I think it certainly is good enough for Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring. And when you look at the heat island effect and you look at the climate that continues changing, we know that urban core surfaces without tree canopy tend to be 20, 30, and sometimes even 40 degrees higher. And so we're not only protecting the environment, we're protecting the residents and everything else down there. And I would support the staff recommendation here as well.
Councilman Novato and then Council Chair Reamer.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree with that. I do believe that we have to be very mindful whenever making and supporting these plans to set up the most optimal conditions for especially our urban cores. And we do have, as has been stated, a precedent of how we treat areas like Bethesda, which have moved forward with their redevelopment. But, you know, at the one hand, it's hard because we talk about making sure that we can find and fund more urban parks, and then to make a decision like this, to me, is counterintuitive. So I definitely would support the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Reamer has a clarifying comment.
Well, I just wanted to clarify. It was not a staff recommendation. We actually went with the staff recommendation at committee. We have received comments from the community.
Oh, okay.
And
well, then I support the community's request to make sure that we are,
of which there are many,
have parity with.
If you don't mind, I can clarify.
Maybe Councilmember Hucker can rephrase.
I take it back.
The chairman could comment on this as well.
Well, we knew in Bethesda the market is just stronger than it is anywhere else, so it can support a lot of different things that other parts of the county, frankly, can't. Silver Spring is number 2, but sometimes number 2 there's quite a distance between number 2 and number 1, just as far as rents, strength of the market for new development. So I think the committee was concerned that the perfect is the enemy of the good, and in fact, if you make it too difficult to redevelop, you're going to get 0 trees. But I'm not here to fight you on it. I just want to point out that Silver Spring and Bethesda are in different positions in terms of the market. The other thing I want to preview for you, again, sorry to take you to another project entirely, but it does tie back to this pretty directly. We're going to be sending you some recommendations for a package of amendments to the Forest Conservation Law, which is designed to produce no net loss of trees. One of the recommendations we made there is on sites where there are no trees, like some of these urban sites in Silver Spring, Bethesda, and the like, there are currently requirements to plant forest. One of the suggestions that we've made, which is relevant to what you're talking about right now, is crediting tree plantings for those sites that are not forests. So the problem with forest conservation law as it applies to afforestation in urban areas is those trees get planted in a different watershed, sometimes in an entirely different area of the county, because there's no room to plant a forest. But we believe, the planning board believes, that if you were to give credit for tree plantings that do not amount to forest, that is not 20,000 square feet of contiguous tree cover, you could give credit for street trees, you could give credit for plantings on site. That would, if you're going to up the requirement for tree canopy, you could make it easier for development to occur and simultaneously put the trees where I think we all agree they're the most necessary to reduce the urban heat island effect. It does not serve the same ecological function as forest, that's true, but it's still extremely valuable. So I would urge you, if you're going to up the canopy requirement in downtown Silver Spring. When you get to that forest conservation package that we're going to send you, I would urge you to credit plantings that don't amount to forest, because that's going to put the trees in the urban area in the place that is what I think Councilmember Hucker is most concerned about. Hope that all made sense. I know it's a little complicated, it's different moving parts.
And I just wanted to add the language on page 15 that's in the middle of the page with the underlines and brackets is really what's before you right now. In order to address what some of the community has written to you, what you would probably need to do to get most of their concerns is change that first word where the bullet is from encourage to require, and to add in the overall goal throughout the plan to reach a 45% tree canopy, and that is not forest, it's tree canopy over the 20 to 25 years of the plan on public and private property. And the trees that Chair Anderson was just describing that could be planted under our new no net loss provisions would apply to that 45% tree cover. Those would be, I think, from what you have in the bold, two of the biggest changes that could address issues being raised by the residents. But obviously it's the council's choice.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ndu, did you get that?
Yeah, if I may, so it's going to say require a minimum of 35% green cover, keep all the underlined stuff that the Fed committee did recommend, and then add in A through E from the course. Or sorry, add in C, just C, the tree canopy goal.
Terrific. I'm just going to make a quick comment before Councilmember Hucker will make a formal motion. I agree with Councilmember Hucker's sentiments here, and I appreciate the committee's recommendation. I understand where they were coming from. I think, though, that I understand the concern that there's an apples and oranges comparison between Silver Spring and Bethesda. I get that. But I noted recently I had the opportunity to participate in an event on top of one of the roofs in downtown Bethesda, and what struck me was among the many things is this beautiful new skyline was the tree canopy, and it is remarkable. And as the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, having that tree canopy has public health benefits, significant ones. And so I think that as we set out a course, while we want to balance ensuring aggressive opportunities to meet the full potential of downtown Silver Spring, I also think we don't want to forget about these items that really do impact quality of life. So I appreciate the thoughtful comments, and I will support Councilmember Hucker's motion. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you. Well said. I move the language as described by Legislative Council.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Council Vice President Glass. All those in favor of Councilmember Hucker's motion, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. Problem. I just wanted to add one last comment. As next council will continue to embark, and the next executive on this journey of racial equity and social justice, I think no doubt that there are going to be moments like these that are going to be really important, because you can argue, of course, that you want to redevelop downtown Silver Spring in general and provide more housing, affordable housing and things like that, and that goes to the heart of racial equity and social justice. But there are some elements, in my opinion, that need to be very carefully prioritized, and something like tree canopy is critical to the health of all of our residents. And I think when we make comparisons between Bethesda and other places, and we know you look at the demographic, the socioeconomic status of that particular district that includes Bethesda and the rest of the county, that goes to the heart of racial equity and social justice. That is what equity is really all about. And we do have other tools to achieve those other goals, right? Of more, hopefully, residential and commercial investments and things like that. But something like this, in my opinion, again, going forward, needs to have, I think, special consideration, because it is very difficult to recreate something like tree canopy and green space and things like that. So I just really wanted to make that comment, because this is going to be a very interesting experiment for decision makers. And I appreciate, the planning board's position because there is an angle. But there will be moments like these where we're going to have to think really hard about what it is that we're going to prioritize in terms of racial equity and social justice, setting up the county for success in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nadeau?
So next up is energy and carbon emissions. So more than half of the county's emissions come from building inefficiencies. So there are several recommendations related to optimizing site orientation for solar energy, recommendations such as that. And the committee supports these recommendations. Next is water quality. So over 77% of the plan's area is impervious surface. And when you have impervious surface, you have runoff into our waterways. And so there are stormwater and other green infrastructure related recommendations at the bottom of page 16. And the committee unanimously agreed with those as well. Next is transportation. Obviously, vehicle demand and use, or reducing vehicle demand and use, will help us reduce our greenhouse gases. So the plan has goals and recommendations that encourage pedestrian and bicycle travel, and the committee supported those recommendations. Next is food security. So the plan estimated that between 6 and 22% of families in the plan area experience food insecurity due to various factors. So there are goals and recommendations that encourage urban agriculture and community gardens, healthy corner stores, farmers markets, composting, and the committee unanimously supported those recommendations as well. And that is it for resilient downtown.
So without objection, I think we support the recommendations within resilient downtown.
The next section is community facilities. So Silver Spring actually has realized a lot of its goals in terms of community facilities. So the new library, the courthouse, the fire station, working on the South County Recreation and Aquatic Center. So there aren't actually too many community facility recommendations in the plan. This is also divided into several sections. First is safety and security. So maintaining a downtown where streets are safe for pedestrians during the day, but also for nighttime activities. And the committee supported those recommendations. Next is homelessness and housing and security services. Plan goals include providing enhanced and expanded housing and support facilities for the unhoused, such as by encouraging partnerships and working with service providers. The committee did support these recommendations, but there's a small clarification. It says the phrase sufficient places, and since it's unclear whether sufficient means the number or the quality, the recommendation is to provide more places that are welcoming and supportive. So that's the committee recommendation for that. And then lastly, for community facilities is Montgomery College, which of course has over 100 disciplines, thousands of students from hundreds of countries, or 140 countries. So the plan recommends continuing to work with the college. So those are the plan-wide recommendations for Montgomery College. And staff apologizes. There was one more recommendation here that's not in the packet that Councilmember Jawando had raised about having language in the plan about noise reduction, and the committee agreed with adding that language as well. So that is it for community facilities.
Councilmember Jawando.
I just want to make sure, so it will be added in.
Yes.
Okay, even though, okay, yeah. Can you just explain the point so they know what I said?
Yeah, so because Silver Spring does
say it, but I won't have you say it.
does have a very active nightlife, just making sure there's language in the plan about making sure in development and just day-to-day activities that the plan area does continue to conform with. There are noise reduction provisions in the county code already. So just adding a bullet. I think community facilities is probably the best place to include that language, maybe even under safety and security. But yeah, so that was the intent of that language, is to make sure that those residents' complaints are being addressed.
Thank you.
Great. Then without objection, I believe my colleagues and I accept those recommendations as well.
Great. We're now going to move on to the historic resources section. And as you know, the master plan for historic resources was created in 1979 and includes all officially designated historic sites and districts per the council's approval. This section makes reference to that. It educates people on what that plan is. And the committee supported, there were goals for that, and the committee unanimously supported the goals for the master plan for historic preservation. There was some further language where there was discussion about the Silver Spring Shopping Center and Theater. And the committee did make some slight revision to that language. It's on page 20 of your staff report. It basically just wanted to add part of it talking about the activation of the parking lot that precedes that Silver Spring Shopping Center to encourage and respect the ongoing preservation consistent with retaining the lot's character, defining shape and feature, and it goes on. And they unanimously supported that revision. The plan makes one new site recommendation for study for the master plan for historic preservation, which is the Weller's Dry Cleaner. We talked about this in committee, which supported that recommendation as well. Okay. The section also goes on to talk about the National Register of Historic Places, and educating again anyone reading the plan what that means. And notifying them that the honorific listing in the National Register places no restriction on what a non-governmental owner may do with the property up to and including demolition unless the project does receive some federal assistance. And you'll see on page 21 it lists several properties, business-oriented properties and garden apartments that historic preservation staff would coordinate with those property owners to simply study the potential for listing. So it's not making the statement that they will be listed. It's just noting that these are historic in nature and they would contact those property owners. What I'll note here is that we were contacted by a property owner as we were finishing up our review with the Fed committee, and that property owner is or their representative was related to the Perpetual Bank building property and requested not to be included on this list as they have ideas for redevelopment and were not interested in that honorific designation. So at this time just could make that easy change before the plan is printed. With that, the section goes on, talks about archaeological resources, has some goals for that activity, especially as it relates to any redevelopment of, say, Blair Park, because we know there is a historic site there. And the committee supported those goals. And then there's another section called Cultural and Heritage Resources, and this talks about ways to promote important things in history in this area, cultural history and heritage, and included establishing a legacy business registry to recognize economic, cultural, and social contributions of longstanding businesses, studying potential incentives to preserve local independently owned businesses, partnering with existing and new local entities to add interpretive histories absent from the present narrative, and celebrating diversity, heritage, and history of the plan area. And then lastly, supporting the Streets and Park Facilities Renaming Review Project. The committee supported those goals. Then you'll see on page 22 there were also numerous recommendations related to this, and the committee supported those recommendations as well. The two things to note were some correspondence that the council received during the plan review. One was related to the Fenton Building. The Fenton Building is located in what is a historic district in the downtown Silver Spring area. And the information that came in was about a lessee of that building, the Morton's Department Store. Was very progressive for its time. It was an early lessee of the building. And when it moved into downtown Silver Spring, it provided a unique experience for African American customers, as the owner, Mortimer Charles Leibowitz, provided, as we've been told, integrated dressing rooms and hired African Americans as retail clerks in all branches of the business. So this came in, and the idea was the community members that submitted it said they just were hoping to find a place in the plan where this could be noted, understanding that the building wasn't owned by that person, but really just the history there. And given there is a section in this historic resources chapter related to the locational atlas, which is where the historic district is noted, the language could possibly go there. And the other is also just to make another note for the Jessup Blair house, that there's sort of a little bit of a lack of language related to that property, and they wanted to see that also highlighted in this portion of the plan where we're talking about historic resources. So that covers the committee's recommendations and the plan's recommendations related to historic resources.
Without objection.
Okay, that's great. And now we're going to move on to implementation. Ms. Nadeau will take back over.
So for implementation, first up is zoning. So there's a section about public benefits in the CR zones. The plan recommends certain public benefits as priorities, such as public facilities, affordable housing, public open space. The plan also recommends removing the transit proximity and structured parking categories. There's a good long conversation at Fed about this one, so I'll go through sort of the testimony and where the Fed committee landed. So we received correspondence from United Therapeutics as well as the Silver Spring Chamber of Commerce asking not to remove either of these categories because they believe that it would stifle development if they don't get to use these public benefit options. So the committee had a split vote on some of these parts. So first, the committee recommended adding language to the plan explaining why the public benefit options were being removed, because that wasn't in there. So I would provide some clarity for the public and for developers. The reasons being it's Silver Spring, so giving the transit proximity category was, well, I'll say it gently, was kind of a gimme. And then also what the council's goals are in terms of structured parking. So the committee was unanimous on adding that clarification. The committee was also unanimous on removing the transit proximity category as the plan suggested, since that was also done in the Bethesda overlay zone. Where the committee split is it was 2-1 for removal of the structured parking category. So Councilmember Friedson, dissenting, did not support this recommendation since it is an incentive for development. One thing to note is the plan, as you know, includes a lot of language about redeveloping a lot of our public parking garages. So developers might really want that structured parking. So that was one reason to leave that category in there. And council staff had also recommended removing that category because planning has proposed a study of CR public benefits as part of a future work program. So the council could wait for that study to see what's going to happen to the whole council. So that was the committee's vote on. So it's 3-0 adding language, 3-0 agreeing with removing transit proximity, and then 2-1 on whether to remove the structured parking. So I will pause in case there's discussion.
Chairman Raymer.
Thank you. Well, the majority of the committee felt that a development in downtown Silver Spring is going to provide the parking for itself that it needs to provide. And it's hard to imagine a lot of development happening there without having to do structured parking. It's going to be at the base of the building, most likely, or in a garage that's on the same property. So it just seemed clear to us that the projects are going to have to build their own structured parking regardless. And so why would we offer public benefit points for something that they're going to have to do for themselves? So we felt that we would rather see the planning board be able to negotiate for public benefits that wouldn't already be provided. And those would include a lot of different things. It could be the energy performance of the building and the climate resiliency. It could be, affordable housing. It could be just about anything. So there's a long menu of public benefits, but we felt that in this case, no public benefit consideration would nudge a project to do more parking than they were going to do. And in fact, we don't necessarily want them to do more parking than they're going to do. We kind of want them to build the minimum parking anyway. And so why provide a public benefit point for it? So that was the majority's rationale.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't going to speak, but now that I think I have to just explain, it was a respectful conversation. I think there's a reasonable points that are being made by colleagues on the committee. The staff recommendation, which is ultimately what I was supporting, and the rationale behind it is, first of all, a core part of urban redevelopment in the county relates to the undergrounding of parking, the structuring of surface parking, and a number of other things that have significant benefits, even when they're being done for private purposes. Take, for instance, we talk about other markets, Pike and Rose. The county participated in the building of that parking, and in fact, many redevelopment projects all over the country are subsidized specifically to do structured parking because it is so expensive and oftentimes becomes cost prohibitive, and it creates better, more urban, more walkable, more livable environments, allows you to place parking in areas that keep people safer, that create better placemaking. There's a reasonable case to be made that redevelopment will need this. There's also a reasonable case to be made that it will prevent redevelopment because of the cost prohibition. So rather than the county having to outlay financial support, which it often does in order to make developments like this happen, providing a public benefit is a fairly cost-effective way to incentivize the behavior that we want to create a more urban setting. Having said all of that, the ultimate goal is to have fewer people need to rely on cars. The creation of structured parking helps to create places that do that. And there are benefits for reducing parking and reducing vehicle miles traveled, which is the ultimate goal for all of us. So this isn't as dramatic a disagreement, I think, as perhaps it may appear. I think it was a good conversation committee. If there's interest from colleagues, I still believe that providing this public benefit but not providing the proximity to transit, which already is incentivized based on behavior, makes sense. But I respect colleagues, and I'm happy to move forward with what the will of the body is.
Thank you. Council Vice President Glass.
Appreciate hearing both sides of the committee conversation, and I support the committee recommendation because downtown Silver Spring has the Silver Spring Transit Center. It has the red line. It will have the purple line. It has walkable streets, and that is, I think, ultimately what we're trying to encourage and foster. And so as we look to the future of the downtown Silver Spring area, we need to focus our energies and try and harness the development community's energies in areas in which we'd like to see. And if we want them to continue supporting the public transportation and supporting the walkable, livable area, I don't think that we should I think the committee had it right in removing the structured parking category for this recommendation. So I support the committee's rec.
Thanks. Just my own thoughts here. I think I'm going to be in the minority on this, but I actually agree with Councilmember Friedson. I think that, when we hear from some of the most important organizations that are doing some of the most exciting development work in downtown Silver Spring, if they make a point to weigh in on an issue like this, I'm listening. And I do very much understand and respect the committee's ultimate recommendation here, but I do think that where we can, where there's low-hanging fruit that would help encourage, further development in an area that we all know really would benefit from it, as we all would, I think that makes sense. But I also will obviously follow the will of the body, but I do agree with Councilmember Friedson on this one. Councilmember Katz?
And I agree with both you and Councilmember Friedson. I believe that if you really want to have development, then you look to the people who are developing and ask them their opinion. And their opinion is saying that we should do what Councilmember Friedson is suggesting and what you're suggesting. So I, too, am in favor of what Councilmember Friedson has suggested.
I think it'll be close, but Councilmember Friedson, did you want to move formally that motion? Oh, sorry. Chairman Reamer.
Yeah, I can speak to a motion, but either way. I just wanted to touch on one specific point about an example that was referred to, which is United Therapeutics. If I thought that this would somehow challenge what they want to do, that would be a concern. However, we are actively in a joint development process with them. And I think the real issue is the future of the garage that's on Cameron, and how many spaces will be required and all those things. That is a negotiation that's underway, and planning has a view that it's similar to my view, and they are weighing in actively that we can minimize parking on that site. And I think that's really what United Therapeutics is seeking, is the ability to have a successful project there. And so this is not really part of that. This public benefits thing is not, it's not a concern in that context. So it can be resolved through the actual redevelopment process. So, Gwen, can you comment on this? Because you made some comments.
Yeah, I think, and I do want to clarify, there are still public benefit points available for minimizing parking. This is not changing that in any way. The issue with the structured parking is on small, tight lots like we have in Silver Spring. You really physically cannot redevelop without doing structured parking or underground parking. So as Ms. Nadeau said, this is another one that's in her terms sort of a gimme, that basically every single property in Silver Spring, if they redevelop, is going to have structured parking. And so this was basically trying to acknowledge that it was a sort of existing condition. This particular public benefit point is really valuable in a place like Pike and Rose, where they have a very large piece of land and they could have made the choice of having some of their parking be in a surface parking lot. But they made the choice, in order to get these benefit points, to put most of their parking into structured parking. When you have a small urban site, there's really no place to put a surface parking lot. Those spots just, that land just doesn't exist. So the reason that we were recommending this was not to penalize anyone or to stop any development, but just to note that in a place like Silver Spring, structured parking isn't an amenity, it's a reality. And so we don't think it should be considered an amenity. There still would be other kinds of amenities for parking, though, including minimizing parking. You can get a lot of public benefit points for doing that.
Council Vice President Glass, then I've got, I believe, Councilmember Hucker.
I appreciate Director Wright making some of the comparisons, right? We're having a lot of conversations today comparing downtown Silver Spring to downtown Bethesda, and now it's being compared to Pike and Rose and North Bethesda, South Rockville, whatever we're calling that growing and exciting part of our community. But the reality is they are very different. They don't have the same access to the Red Line, the Silver Spring Transit Center, the Purple Line. That's why in my previous comments I enumerated on the various transportation channels for people to travel. And so I think that is what the striking difference is. And if we want Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring, to continue taking advantage of all of those different types of transportation in a truly urban setting, then we need to change course a little bit.
Thank you. I've got Councilmember Hucker and then actually Councilmember Jawanda wanted to chime in too.
Thank you. I think almost everything's been said. I really appreciate the debate. I do think, yeah, Silver Spring is a unique place facing, unique challenges. Having said that, I obviously think we need more tree cover, but since we just added that requirement, to me, we should continue to do what we can to build on the success that we've had with the limited development that we've had in Silver Spring. So for me, I'm with Councilmember Friedson on this, and I'm happy to move that.
So that's moved and seconded. Councilmember Jawanda.
Just thank you. Just want to make the point. I think it's important here. Ms. Wright or staff, whoever's has the list quick, most accessible. The other public benefit items that are on the list.
The full list or the ones that are being prioritized in Silver Spring?
The latter.
The latter. Okay. So in Silver,
I always remember latter because it's last. The last thing you said. So bring one home.
So in Silver Spring, the following public benefits are going to be prioritized: major public facilities, affordable housing, small business opportunity, streetscape improvement, dwelling unit mix, public open space, tree canopy, habitat restoration, and historic preservation.
Awesome, thank you. I knew where it was. I just wanted to read it into the record. And so the point that I think was made by Ms. Wright and by planning, you cannot develop, and this is a Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring plan, right? The public benefit study is going to look at this across the board, but we make decisions in master plans. You cannot redevelop in downtown Silver Spring without, in a small lot particularly, without providing structured parking. So the same reason we removed the proximity to transit is the same reason the majority of the committee proposed removing proximity to parking. The other thing is, the net effect is, it's also because it's not just we don't want to give it to them because it's already happening. We want these other things to happen and to get points for doing those things. And again, I think the context of public benefit points, and I want to ask Ms. Wright to correct me if I'm wrong here, this is not whether a project's going to happen, whether they're going to be able to do a project or not, or adding millions of dollars to it. They're going to have to build the parking. This is whether we can consider applications, or Ms. Wright, state the function of public benefit points in this context, please.
Sure. Every development in our downtown areas is what's called optional method. There's a base level of zoning, which is typically 1 FAR in the CR zones. To get above that base level, you have to go through an optional method process by which you go through this analysis of what public benefits the project is going to produce. There's a whole list of public benefits. We have a whole booklet of it, and we have a numerical system for how you propose your public benefits. The goal of the public benefits is to do something above and beyond what you would normally have to do anyway in redevelopment. So you don't get public benefit points unless you go above and beyond the required number of MPDUs. You don't get public benefit points unless you go beyond what current county codes require about environmental sustainability for buildings.
Right, so it's a bonus.
It is showing that you're doing something above and beyond what is basic requirement of building your building.
Right, so you can still have a project approved without getting every public benefit point.
Oh, absolutely.
This is just a bonus, again, to have a benefit to the public. So I think that context is important too. We're not talking about making it more expensive. This is about how do you balance and give some extra public benefit for something that you weren't already going to do. It's the whole point of the program. So I really have difficulty understanding why we would do one and not the other. So just want to make that point, and I'll obviously stick with my vote in committee. Thank you.
Councilmember Friedson, followed by Councilmember Rice.
Could we just get clarification what discretion the planning board has when it comes to the awarding of public benefit points on a case-by-case basis with respect to optional method development?
Yes, as we discussed in committee, the planning board does have the discretion to reject the proffer of whatever the public benefits are. So even if you meet the minimum point level and say, hey, I gave you wayfinding, I gave you public art, I gave you X, Y, and Z, the planning board could say that's not good enough for a particular project. It's not commensurate with the quantum of benefit that we would think is reasonable in light of the size of the project, the other, the economics of the particular development application. We try very hard not to make that a discretionary call. We reserve the right to do that, but we want to provide as much certainty as possible in the public benefit schedule. So we are not in the business of rejecting applications without a very good reason that meet the point minimum. But we do retain that discretion to say, in a particular case, we don't think this particular combination of public benefits, even if it technically meets the requirements of the zone, is adequate.
Yeah, I just think for the prior conversation, I think it's important to note that we're retaining the discretion that exists where the planning board can determine whether or not to award the benefit points based on the optional method development. But I'll yield back and allow other colleagues to speak, and then hopefully we can call the question relatively soon.
Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate that, Mr. President, and I appreciate the points that Councilmember Friedson made. Look, when we're talking about allowing for the planning board to have some discretion, some flexibility when it comes to determining whether or not a project meets all of the criteria that are going to be important for the community, that is one of the things that we've always erred on the side of lending towards our planning board, to making sure that they understand. It's the reason why we have the language and fight about what that language is in our master plans, to make sure that that happens. When I think about affordable projects that are going to be coming to downtown Silver Spring, who may have a challenge when it comes to actually building as a part of their proposal, structured parking, it is one in which I think we need to incentivize and reward them for doing so and still keeping their units affordable. Something that's a judgment call that the planning board would be able to make. And so I do agree that keeping that flexibility, having that discretion that's there, and I understand that you don't wield it normally in a lot of cases, but what to me that stands for is that, yes, in typical cases where you have a project that's not necessarily as affordable as we'd like, and we know that they're going to build parking because we know that that's basically a requirement in the area of Silver Spring, well, fine. You don't have to do it. But for a project that comes before you and you know they're going above and beyond to do so many other things that are important to the community, then you have that discretion to say, yeah, I'm going to give you the public benefit points. I think that that's a good thing. And so I think that affordability that's given to the planning board, having the discretion, makes complete sense in this case. And I do understand that, again, it may feel a little bit different, and you don't want to always wield that sort of discretionary power. But I think in this kind of specialized case, it makes sense, and that's why I would support it.
All right. We have a motion moved by...
It's all right. So actually, this is what I was going to, exactly what Councilmember Rice just described. I do remember us sitting here and having, robust deliberations about this whole list of what would constitute some public benefits and what should be included, what it shouldn't be. And I think that we arrived at a good place because we do have a comprehensive list, but we also give the planning board that discretion. And the idea is that it's there, it's available. But yes, there will be particular circumstances that may allow for something to be a bit more desirable than another thing. And that is why I just didn't feel like it was necessary to begin to exclude through master plans that ability. I think that we have that list, we have that discretion, and we should utilize it and tailor it wherever possible through the discretion that the planning board has. So I will support Councilmember Friedson's proposal.
Thank you. Chair Reamer, last word.
My last word, anyway. The planning board recommended that we take this action to remove this option from the public benefits amenity list. If this is what the body wants to do, it's okay. But it just means there'll be fewer public benefits with development in downtown Silver Spring. That's all. So, I think what the committee recommended was good, but this will be okay. Thanks.
Yes.
Is this just on the issue of proximity? I'm sorry, just on the issue of parking, not on proximity to transit?
Correct.
Okay, because
Proximity to transit was 3 houses.
that's 3. Yeah, okay. I'm asking because I think functionally the same thing. You decide to build this in Silver Spring, you got to do. So I just, some of the arguments here seem to suggest that we shouldn't be doing one because there's discretion. But okay, so I just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
All right, we've got a motion from Councilmember Hucker and a second from Councilmember Friedson. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. And that is Councilmembers Katz, Hucker, myself, Friedson, Navarro, and Rice. All those opposed? That is Councilmembers Jawando, Reamer, and Vice President Glass. So the motion passes 6-3. For the straw vote.
For the straw vote, yes.
Yeah.
So next is on-site public open space. The plan recommends channeling resources to create new and improve existing public parks. The committee was unanimous on that recommendation. So I think the next straw vote is now on everything else in the zoning implementation zoning part of the plan. Okay, so next up is partnerships. So the plan supports continued cooperation between the public and the private sectors to coordinate various initiatives and services in downtown Silver Spring. There's a lot of recommendations in this section. They start at the bottom of page 24 and go to the top of page 25, so I won't read them all for you, but I'll go through the committee recommendations. So the committee unanimously recommended several changes. First, the committee recommended removing the recommendation to create a champion for downtown. The idea being that this caused some confusion because we have a lot of existing entities such as the Urban District and the BID and various other organizations. So at about the middle of page 26, planning and council staff came up with some language to revise that section, and basically anytime it said champion for downtown, we changed it to other entities in downtown. Also removed county executive's business advancement team to just say county government. The idea being this is a 20-year plan, so we want to be open to any entities that the council creates or that aren't working, just leave it more flexible. So that was the committee's first recommendation. Next was removing the creation of a fund, a quote, fund operated by MCEDC to invest in office using startups. This is being removed because it already exists via the Economic Development Fund. And then the third committee recommendation is removing the sentence, create a business plan to define how an incubator can add value to startup firms, to guide operations and enable evaluation. This was removed because it was unclear who would be creating that business plan. So those are the recommendations for the partnership section.
Without objection.
Okay, so that is implementation. Now we are on the property-specific requests that the Fed Committee reviewed over the course of its work sessions. First is Fenton Village, so I will pass it off to Ms. Dunn.
This one's pretty straightforward. In Fenton Village, you did receive a letter from the county executive, and it is, again, in regards to Garage 4, but this one was really specific to zoning, and it requested an increase in the zoning being allocated to this property, noting that that would also be something that would help with the redevelopment of the site should that occur. And so the committee was unanimous in supporting that zoning change from a 3 FAR to a 5 FAR. The height remained unchanged.
Without objection.
Okay.
Next is Metro Center. We received testimony from the property owners of the Metro Plaza. They asked that the increased height be increased because the substation limited their development. So the committee actually did not recommend increasing the height because given the recommendation to map all the heights in the BIS, their height will be 300 feet. This is going to be a kind of weird vote because you're going to vote on the BIS after this. So if you want, we could circle back to this one or however you want to do it. You can just keep moving if you'd like.
I don't see any concerns raised by colleagues, so I think we can move on.
So next is 8600 Georgia Avenue. So the request was to have additional height as well as density due to some of the neighboring properties receiving additional height and density. So the committee unanimously recommended, again, increasing the height since that was consistent with abutting and confronting neighbors. And then if there's changes to the BIS, that will go up to 300 feet. And the committee was 2-1 on increasing the mapped density for this property. And the increase would be to be consistent with abutting and confronting neighbors. So the discussion that happened here, and there's going to be a couple properties like this, is there is going to be a density fund. So there were some property owners who asked to just outright have that increase and not contribute to the fund. So the committee was 2-1. Councilmember Jawando dissented, believing the property owners should contribute to that fund.
Did you want to speak to that, Councilman Jawando? Sure.
I'll be quick so we can move over. The point here was the fund was created
and each property is specific. I think this is the one next. This is the which property is this?
8600 Georgia Avenue.
This gas station. Yeah. So this is right next to the Twin Towers there, I think. Yeah. So the gas station here, great redevelopment opportunity. We're giving the map height that would be given is already what there, to be clear.
Well, what the committee and council looks like they've approved is that would be mapped at 240, and unless then the agreement is to map to the building height incentive zone heights, which would get it to 300.
Right, that's under the committee. But what I was advocating for was
today it has 145.
Yeah, right. No. But we agreed that they should get a certain level, but that to go above that, or to get the density. Excuse me.
It's the density.
To get the density, that there would be. We gave them the height. Everyone agreed to giving the height.
Correct.
I'm just trying to parse this out.
Right. So the density is 5 FAR, and they requested 8 FAR.
Right, and there are some around there that are
that are 8.
That are 8. There's some that aren't, but that was it was one of those things where the whole idea of this fund is to accrue some benefit for other things, and if you want to go higher than the 5, because what is it mapped? What is it right now?
Right now, it is going to be a 5 FAR.
Right. It's currently 5. So the plan didn't award many properties, or if any, maybe 1 or 2, any additional density.
Right. But we are given the height. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a baseline. So the point here was the whole point of this fund is to increase for other benefits in the area. If you want to go get that additional density, there are a mix of buildings around that some have that higher level of density, some don't. So that was the point, and that comes up with another building too, I think.
Yeah, there's going to be another property later in a different district that'll have the same.
The point is,
issue.
if we're going to have this, we should have people contribute to it. I think, because if they want the whole point of it is, if you want a little more, contribute to this. That's the point of the fund. Thank you.
Councilmember Reamer.
I just wanted to clarify that the ultimate mapped height will be 300. Okay, great. So we're good.
Okay. So I don't see anyone without objection. Then I think we agree with the staff recommendation. I mean the committee recommendation. Excuse me.
Next is the Ripley District. So in the opportunity sites language in this section, there's one bullet that just says block of Ripley Street, Dixon Avenue, Georgia Avenue, and then says the plan recommends redevelopment of this site. So we received a letter from the owner of 8226 Georgia Avenue, of 8230, saying that one of those properties had already been redeveloped, that since it's all private owners, they're not all going to develop together. And so the committee recommended a few tweaks to the language here. First, adding language to the plan to make clear that while that whole block is listed as an opportunity site, the expectation isn't that they all have to develop at once or together since it's separate owners. The committee also recommended adding language that streetscape and other public use facilities don't significantly reduce the developable area, because that was a concern one of the property owners had as well. And then the committee recommended striking the sentence, staff recommends coordinating redevelopment of this site with the property across from Ripley Street. So those are the committee recommendations for this block. Next, the council received a letter from Montgomery Preservation for 8230 Georgia Avenue. So this opportunity site is the former corporate headquarters of Little Tavern Companies. We received a letter noting the property's history of racial discrimination and asking for nearby signage telling that story. The committee did not recommend any amendments to the plan based on this testimony. As planning had reported to the committee, this property has already been studied for preservation, and it already has a historical marker downtown, so no reason to remove it from the opportunity site or to give it a historic designation.
Without objection.
Next is South Silver Spring. So this is 7980 Georgia Avenue. This is also listed as an opportunity site. We received a letter from the owners asking to remove one of the protected crossings that was in the illustrative diagram. Also asking to strike language about the community garden, and then striking the language about where the through block connection should be. So the committee's recommendation here is First, the removal of the existing community garden language was actually done in an earlier section, so the committee agreed with that. And then removing the language about where the through block connection is, so it'll still say to create a through block connection, but it won't specify what streets, which allows the developer to have some flexibility as they move forward with their plans.
Without objection.
And then lastly, for this district, we received letters from the owner of 8001 Newell Street, which is a self-storage facility, asking for language to allow additional height for this property. A little bit of background, they're currently allowed to have that use, but it is a grandfathered use, so they cannot expand under the current zoning ordinance. But the committee did not recommend giving any additional height at this time, since self-storage uses. Yes, sorry, expanding the use. So since this is a self-storage facility and it's already grandfathered use in the CR zone, sorry, to clarify. So the committee did not recommend any changes at this time. Council staff notes if the council does want to change self-storage uses, it probably makes more sense to do it countywide than specifically for Silver Spring.
Without objection.
Okay, sorry about that. So now we have the downtown North District. This is similar to the conversation you've just had. There was one property at 8700 First Avenue that was mapped at a lower height than its abutting property, which was closer to the single-family neighborhood and had a slightly lower density than some of the properties surrounding it. So it had written in and had a request to increase its density from a 3 FAR to a 5 FAR and to increase its height to 175. They were asking for this as hoping to redevelop the site for affordable co-living apartments where residents would have their own bedrooms but shared cooking living facilities, but an application has yet to be filed for that. And this was where the committee was unanimous 3-0 in approving the additional height that they requested, and the committee was 2-1 in allowing the additional density for this one individual site, with Councilmember Jawando dissenting, and basically for the reasons that you've heard already this afternoon about not adding to the density unless they wanted to take advantage of the density fund.
Seeing no comments from colleagues, I'll assume that we concur with the committee recommendation.
Okay. There's another, there was two other requests related to the downtown north. One was from United Therapeutics. They had written in, they had asked about an expansion of the building height incentive zoned area, which will be mapped at the higher height, but asking it to expand slightly. It would now include Garage 2, the property owned by MCDOT, which actually goes hand in hand. You had also gotten the correspondence from the executive branch about Garage 2. It was currently split zoned, and something that planning staff and RI had recognized as we were looking at the properties. Typically we try to resolve things like that in the master plan process. Take a property owned by one individual that is split zone and put it under one of two zones. They're requesting that occur. The part of the split zone is the surface lot next to the garage that also houses their maintenance building, and the recommendation is just to make it a consistent zone, same as the Garage 2 recommendation.
Without objection.
Okay. And then you have one recommendation that came in, one request that came in related to adjacent communities. There is a R60 property. It is a single-family house structure. I think it is being used as an accounting business right now, but it is right next to the it's in the adjacent communities next to the downtown North District, and the structure next door is a very large multifamily high-rise apartment building. So this property owner wrote in requesting to have their zoning changed to a multifamily zone. The request came in relatively late. It came in during the discussion with the Fed committee, so not at the hearing. Not really a way for the properties around this property owner to be noticed. It does abut two other R60 single-family houses. So the committee discussed this and actually agreed to a recommendation for a floating zone. So that's not unusual that a property owner that does feel their property is transitional or slightly different than properties near them, they can request a floating zone. In this case, the master plan could recommend a very modest scale floating zone for the property.
You want to speak to it? Chairman Reamer.
Okay. I have to acknowledge the letter we also recently got since our committee deliberation about the property owner's use of this property and that it is not residential. I'm sure you've seen that now. So you know, this master plan recommendation is for a floating zone, which would enable the property owner to apply to do something there. It's hard to know what that. Tell us what the limits of what they can apply for are.
So as we had talked about a CRN floating zone, CRN being the least intense of the CR zones, mixed use. CRN actually allows you to give zero commercial, but in this case, now that we know that there is some commercial use of the property, which is not uncommon, we have home-based businesses in many places in the county, it could allow the most modest amount of commercial density, and the rest of it could be residential. This could allow that property owner to create either a duplex or a triplex on that lot. They could still retain the business in one of the two of the three structures. That's I think the intent of what we had talked about, and Director Wright was conferred that we would work together to figure out what that right amount of a floating zone recommendation would be.
Okay. All right. Well, here we have it. You know, I think it would have to be, if there were anything done, it would have to be done very carefully. I think it's anomalous to do one property and not other properties, but other property there next to it have not come forward and sought anything. So, you know, acknowledging that, you know, here we go.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. For the floating zone, they would they have to come in and ask for a rezoning? So they would have to go, and is that, do they have to prove a mistake or change? So it would be strictly for the that they would ask for the rezoning. Correct. And have to get a would they have to tell the use at that point?
Most likely, yes. They would have to talk about what types of things they would do with the property. But again, it's for the zone, and if the zone allowed a small amount of business and the remainder in residential.
In the home occupations in the county, does it have to be residential in a home occupation?
Yeah, for a
in
home
the same
occupation,
building?
you must live in the structure as well.
And you must live in the structure, the person who actually has the home occupation.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then without objection, then I think we support the staff recommendation.
So with that, we have gone through the whole plan. So we're going to do a lot of straw votes now. So there's an addendum that was posted, and you also all received it last week. The way we're going to do this is we're going to go through the unanimous committee recommendations first, and then the ones that were split. This is everything you haven't already voted on earlier, so everything from the last two work sessions. So I'm going to start with the districts. I do have photos if anybody wants to see them, but otherwise I'm just going to go district by district. So first is the Ellsworth district. The committee supported the recommendation in the plan with minor text revisions for urban design and opportunity sites.
Are you able to say what page you're on as well?
Oh, sorry. So this is actually in an addendum. Yeah.
Page.
Right after page 30.
Oh, I don't know where they placed it. Yeah.
PDF 60.
Thank you. So next is Fenton Village. Committee supports 3-0 the recommendations with minor text revisions to the recommendation for Garage 4 and an opportunity site.
Without objection.
Next is Metro Center. Committee supports the recommendations with minor text revisions to the recommendations for the opportunity sites.
Without objection.
Next is the Ripley District. Committee supports the recommendations with minor revisions to urban design and opportunity sites.
Without objection.
South Silver Spring. Committee supports the recommendations with minor text revisions to urban design, parks and public spaces, and opportunity sites.
Without objection.
Downtown North, committee supports the recommendations with minor text revisions to the recommendations for urban design.
Without objection.
Falklands, the committee supports the recommendations with an addition of sections on park and public spaces and opportunity sites.
Without objection.
And then next is adjacent communities, where the committee supported the plan's recommendation, removing references to attainable housing initiative. Council members have asked to pull this one off for discussion, so I can pause here if you'd like to do that now.
Yes, please. Councilmember Hucker, did you want to?
Sure. I guess I recently learned, and we'll discuss, the upcoming master plan for the Silver Spring adjacent communities that's been announced, right, that wasn't on the table at the beginning of this process, right? Is that accurate?
So I would say in the semi-annual that the planning department did last year, they did put on the work program the Silver Spring Communities Master Plan, but it was not going to start for well over a year, so it hasn't been something that I think, me included, have really realized was on the horizon.
Right, really on the calendar at that
Exactly.
point. It was on the work plan, but not
Exactly.
scheduled. Okay. I mean, in general, I've heard from a lot of members of the community, and I can't fully explain the necessity of dividing up neighborhoods. Planning is the keeper of our neighborhood boundaries, and our civic associations, and so many people rely on them and have, for very many years. I'm a great supporter for 30 years of adding housing near transit. We all believe in smart growth. That's been state policy since Governor Glendenning or before. But to only consider the proximity to transit without consideration of neighborhood boundaries, to me, seems like overly sort of prescriptive. And I would suggest that in the area of Woodside and any other area, I guess, but particularly East Silver Spring, that we don't, in this plan, divide up neighborhoods, but rather come back to those adjacent neighborhoods when we're going to do this Silver Spring Communities Plan in the future. That would be my preference, because I don't think we can easily explain to people why we divided up communities in this based on just mathematical distance from transit, if that was the rationale. Recently, this council dealt with redrawing political boundaries, and we oversaw a process by which we set up a nonpartisan commission to draw up new political boundaries as we're required to. We're the only one, I think, of the 3 largest counties in Maryland that hasn't been sued over our execution of this. So I'm proud of that. We did a good job, I think, and we have 7 good districts. But during that process, some of the most frequent comments we got were not to divide up communities. Like, we didn't want to divide up Rockville and Gaithersburg, and we heard that loud and clear. After the commission came back, they gave us proposed districts, and we went above and beyond to restore Kemp Mill, if I remember, into one district, not multiple ones. So to me, if we just did that, if we knew how important that is in the community, we just did that with political districts, I'm not sure why we wouldn't want to do it in our planning as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of just thoughts and comments here. First of all, my chief of staff, Troy Numry, has been out because of some medical conditions, but she is back. So she's watching virtually this morning and had a chance to brief me on this issue. We have, as I'm sure all of my colleagues have, gotten a fair amount of correspondence on this issue from communities that have expressed significant concern. And I do appreciate that the committee discussed this, and that there is a feeling that parts of the adjacent communities, that it's important, the senior housing facility and 2 townhouse developments need to be included in the master plan so they can be rezoned to achieve their best development outcomes. But I was concerned about, some of the folks who felt that they hadn't been privy to these discussions and were caught a little flat-footed. And if we are going to be discussing this in a subsequent process, it makes sense to me to not include this particular specific issue as part of this process so that it can be included in the adjacent communities discussion.
So,
Ms. Wright?
Yeah, if I can just jump in. We do have a work program item that will begin at the very end of this fiscal year and towards the beginning of fiscal year 23. It has not yet really begun. That is an update to a number of Silver Spring Communities plans. The first thing we typically do when we take on a new planning effort is we do look at the boundaries of the plan, and we get those boundaries to the planning board and get their vote on those. I have said, at least from a staff perspective, that it is my intent when we go to do these Silver Spring communities plans to wrap back in a number of the properties that folks have had concerns about into what had been their traditional master plan areas. And, because we do understand the concern that we've heard from so many residents. The one thing I would caution is that if you at this time decide to change the boundaries of this plan, you will be changing decisions that have been made about properties like the Springville property, which was getting a positive rezoning that the community was not in opposition to. But the property cannot be rezoned if it's not part of this plan. There's also a few other properties like that again, there's been no objection to their rezoning. But if you change the boundary today, then those properties will not get rezoned until perhaps we finish this new work program item, which will take several more years.
That's an important comment. Chairman Anderson?
Well, my house is in one of the two blocks that is in one of the adjacent communities that we're talking about. And honestly, I understand that there's apprehension about the idea of being included in a plan that also includes a central business district. But the fact is, nothing has changed as a result of my house being in the downtown Silver Spring plan and adjacent communities plan versus being in a plan that's taken up next year, which will consider these other properties that are further outside the CBD. It has zero practical effect. The only effect of putting it in or out of the plan boundary is whether or not it is eligible to be considered as part of the deliberations on the master plan. That's it. It does not preclude a future plan as soon as tomorrow, or in this case, next year, because it's part of the work program, considering these edge neighborhoods, any part of them or all of them, again. So I think there are a number of people who are convinced that there's some profound implication to being in or out of this plan versus another plan. That's just not the case. It does not have any effect other than to allow for its consideration as part of a planning process, and the next planning process that happens down the road can consider them again or not consider them or whatever this council decides. So I just think it bears emphasis. My house is still a house. It's still in a single-family neighborhood, and you can change that now. You could change it later. You could decide never to change it. None of that is affected by whether it's in or outside this plan boundary.
Councilmember Friedson wanted to chime in.
Yeah, a couple things, because we did talk extensively in committee about this. So I just wanted to note a couple things that I don't think have come up here. First is there are a number of pedestrian safety recommendations and improvements that were made, and that was one of the reasons why I was most swayed by this, that have significant support, that have nothing to do with zoning, but are part of this process, that would effectively go away, as a result of this, and we'd have to go back to the drawing board, and I think that would be a step backwards in terms of the work on those issues. The second is from a standpoint of process. I came into the committee with a very open mind, I will say, on this, and actually was, if anything, perhaps leaning towards limiting the plan boundaries, because I thought that there was a credible argument to be made if we were not moving forward with the attainable housing strategies inclusion and the other aspects. I wasn't sure what the case really was to keep them in. And I was convinced the other aspect of it is we do have a process, and we have gone through an extensive public process that included the plan boundaries. And while in this case there might be considerable interest in reducing the plan boundaries at the fourth quarter of the planning process at the council, it sets a very dangerous precedent of changing plan boundaries in significant ways moving forward that I don't think is in the best interest of the planning process in general, and I think sends a fairly alarming message to the public that the plan boundaries as advertised through the process from the beginning at the planning board and then ultimately to the council could be changed. So I think there's understandable concern, and I appreciate everything that has come up. I will say I personally came to this with a very open mind, but ultimately the decision here, to me, the non-zoning recommendations in this plan are very important and had significant aspects of it in this portion, and then the question of the process and whether or not moving plan boundaries in significant ways, not to address minor intersection issues, I think were an important part of the conversation that we have. But it seemed like council staff wants to weigh in. Did you turn your?
Well, the only thing I would mention, because it came through in a lot of the correspondence, and the planning department and board can speak to this more, is I completely hear Councilmember Friedson's comments about the process and advertising and the boundary being something that was, holistically considered and discussed. I would say that the correspondence we've received has said that several of the community members in this part of this plan boundary felt that the decision was made at the board and not part of a comprehensive outreach effort prior to the decision at the board that boundaries being set. So that's a little different than sometimes the usual process.
May I speak? Meredith Wellington for the county executive. Excuse me. There's one thing that has not been brought out, which is it's really not the case that the adjacent communities are in the same position as the other neighborhoods in Silver Spring, because the committee ruled that the adjacent communities could be subject to a ZTA and be rezoned as soon as this plan was enacted. And that's a very big difference, because that's not the case with the rest of the neighborhoods. And the only other point I'd like to mention is that staff had an option 3 that was presented to the committee, which was an option to remove the adjacent communities except for the properties at the border who were seeking to be rezoned. And so it dealt with this very concern that you all have expressed.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, just to clarify, since I think it's important that the committee's conversation be shared by the committee, the conversation about subsequent zoning was specifically about the fact that this doesn't change what could or couldn't happen with respect to a ZTA, not that it presupposed. In fact, the key aspect of the committee's conversation was, regardless of the action taken here, if there is no zoning provided specifically related to attainable housing in the adjacent communities, then the subsequent action would have to take place one way or another, whether it's through a functional master plan, whether it's through a zoning text amendment, some other mechanism of zoning had to take place. That is true of this community within the boundary. It's true beyond the boundary. And actually, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, and I'll yield to him if he so chooses, but Councilmember Joanna was specifically talking about his zoning text amendment, which related to which proximity to transit and to metro, and the conversation was centered around noting that, but suggesting that regardless of where the plan boundary on that zoning text amendment would be proposing that as an example. So I just want to clarify the conversation that was had at the committee, and correct for the record that the committee's conversation was never presupposing what was going to happen based on a subsequent zoning text amendment or a subsequent action by the council. Examples were being used for what would need to take place regardless of the decision being made. So I just wanted to make sure I clarified that for colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman Reber.
I just want to be really clear here on the basic point. We considered, through this process, changing the zoning for surrounding adjacent communities, and we decided not to do that, with the exception of several blocks in between Grove and Fenton, and the parcel where there is a senior assisted living facility today. That's really the end of the story. We considered it, and we decided not to do it. We can't change the history that we drew a larger boundary in order to study adjacent communities. And I think it is a good thing that we did that.
because by having a broader boundary, we were able to look closely at properties that are not inside the CBD, but are right next to it, and that would benefit from a change in zoning. And we found some really important ones. I mean, as I said before, if you know downtown Silver Spring and the surrounding environment, you know that there are some significant shortcomings in how buildings have been constructed over the years because of the zoning. And so this plan addresses that, and it will change that over time. It's going to improve the built environment there. That is all that we did. We focused in on a very concise set of properties, and we changed that zoning. We decided not to do zoning in other adjacent communities. So some have said that, well, you know, the plan will enable something to happen that otherwise couldn't happen. It's really not true. It's just really, we considered this, we decided not to do it, and that's kind of the end of the story. So I think Ms. Wellington's comments were quite misleading. But the bottom line is, we pulled back the zoning boundary. We didn't pull back the master plan boundary because we had a master plan process. But we pulled back the zoning boundary. And that is what people should focus on. That's what matters. That's the only thing that actually changes anything, is what's the boundary of the properties that you change the zoning for.
I don't want to beat a dead horse here. Let me just say a couple things. I appreciate Councilmember Hucker requesting that this be teased out so that we could have this robust conversation, because the majority of my colleagues and I did not have the benefit of the committee discussion. I very much appreciate and respect the planning board's feedback and input, and also very much appreciate and respect the community's concerns. I do think there will be a second bite at this apple as we discuss the adjacent communities plan, and there will be an opportunity for them to weigh in at that point. And so, as has been noted, this is not a fait accompli. It sets the table, obviously, but I think there are some unintended potential consequences if we go community by community, and must be cautious about that. I don't disagree with Ms. Wellington that I think the staff recommendation for that third option made sense to me, but at this point the will of the body seems to be to support the committee recommendation, and there is no current motion on the table. So I think we will accept that committee recommendation and move on.
Thank you. If you'll turn the page, I'm not sure the number now because where the addendum got placed, but we're reviewing plan-wide recommendations that have also been before the council. And the first are under the plan-wide land use and zoning recommendations, and the committee recommended unanimously the creation of the capital project fund, the contributions for additional density. The committee also recommended unanimously mapping the heights in the building height incentive zone area, and the committee also recommended unanimously other plan-wide recommendations that were provided in this section that had also been discussed throughout different parts of the plan, primarily in the districts, because they related to the Fenton Village Overlay Zone, the removal of the South Silver Spring Ripley Street Overlay Zone, coordination of public use space for option method development, and then the specific zoning recommendations.
Without objection.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
The next plan-wide recommendation was economic growth, and there were minor text revisions there related to supporting more office market growth, and that was the committee recommendation for that section.
Without objection.
Next was the housing section. The committee recommended removing all references to Thrive and the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative, since they haven't been passed yet, and then also supported all the plan-wide housing recommendations, and there were some text revisions about removing reference to a ZTA and removing, some recommendations regarding the pattern book.
Without objection.
And next up was urban design, which was similar, minor revisions that removed references to Thrive and included language, and a recommendation to include language about diversity and community participation in the selection of a design advisory panel.
Without objection.
And then the last plan-wide recommendation to mention today that you haven't yet talked about is the parks, trails, and public spaces, and the committee was unanimous here as well with respect to the various recommendations on the park facilities in this part of the plan. And you've already noted some of the slight modifications to the Acorn Park and Newell Street.
Without objection.
Great. The next then are there's only very briefly 2 areas in which what was before the council were recommendations from the committee in a 2-to-1 vote. And the first one involved the land use and zoning recommendation, and it wasn't about establishing that fund for density. It was how do you set the fee for residential and non-residential development. So the committee recommended 2-to-1 that the infrastructure fee, the improvement fee, should be $3 per square feet for non-residential development and $5 per square feet for residential. Councilmember Friedson was dissenting and proposed a fee for non-residential of $1 per square foot and a fee for residential of $4, noting the challenges and vacancies facing the Silver Spring office market and other commercial properties in the downtown.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate this. We talked about this a little bit the other day, and again, I'll yield to the will of the body if there's interest. I think it's fundamentally a question of what we think that the market can bear here and how we get to our desired outcomes. And I think there are reasonable questions here. There have been various views and different fiscal analyses to determine, what can be afforded here and what can't be afforded. I will note that we have made other decisions, policy decisions, to try to incentivize development in Silver Spring, including the waiver of impact taxes. The reason for that is that we have determined that this is a market that isn't quite at the point where it can withstand additional costs, and that we are willing, through other means, general fund and otherwise, to subsidize those costs, and through the added property taxes and other income taxes and other benefits that we think that redevelopment would generate. I'm glad that we changed the structure here. I think that was a real positive. I'm glad that we have a bifurcated situation that recognizes that the office market in particular is really challenged, and we really want to pursue that. I think we set the number a little bit high for what can be afforded, and I think that the reality here is a fairly nominal amount of money in the scheme of our public infrastructure costs regardless. And the question is, if one additional project or 2 additional projects, the benefit of that, to me, far outweighs the amount of public support that we're going to have to provide for the other infrastructure in the community. So I still think that a lower number would be more appropriate here and more consistent with our other public policies, but we'll respect the will of the body of what folks think where the number is. And I'll also note, just in fairness to everybody, that we will have opportunities to revisit this. We don't have to reopen the master plan to change the rates. And so I think that's an important point, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge that here, that this isn't the final time over the next 20 or 30 or 40 years that we're going to be able to visit this. And I think that's important to note as well. Thank you.
Ms. Dunn, I think we were going to reach out to the Montgomery Housing Alliance to get their feedback.
I did reach out to them and to another entity, but I did not hear back. I reached out a couple times in the last few days. It was a pretty short window.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think I'm not seeing any comments from colleagues, so I think the will of the body at the moment is to support the staff recommendation. But I would be interested if we did get any correspondence, and since this is a straw vote, it's not a final deal, in what the Housing Alliance says. Yep. Without objection, then we support the committee recommendation. Oh, Councilmember Joando.
I don't know if we're going to do this in reverse order, but I just wanted to, so it could be noted that on the land use and zoning, there was a 2-1 on this utility improvement. Yeah.
My apologies. I missed that. Correct.
Yeah. So I can explain it. It was just that we agreed that there should be a fund for contributions collecting additional density, but I also wanted utility improvement to be a part of the use of that fund. Colleagues didn't agree. I think one of the major things we hear from folks in relation to development is, again, this isn't going to be the end-all be-all, and there'll have to be decisions made about how the money is used, but having a menu of options, infrastructure, including potential utility improvement. There are other funds designated to that, but it's an expensive endeavor. I just thought keeping it on the menu made sense. We didn't. I just wanted to explain that for folks.
All right. Thank you. So, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, just in the interest of everybody understanding, there's no disagreement here, and I'm not proposing anything, but as part of that, I think it was an important conversation as well. I had originally proposed that the funding go to housing. We ultimately decided to land on the Civic Improvement Fund with the 2-to-1 vote on the infrastructure in particular. So I just thought if we were talking about that we note that for colleagues. But I'm pleased that we're in a good place of relative consensus here. Thanks.
So without opposition, we support the committee recommendations there as well.
So the last straw vote for today is housing. So the plan included a recommendation to preserve existing market rate affordable housing. This is the discussion from last week about those garden style apartments, whether those densities should be mapped or whether there should be language in the plan about creating a floating zone. So if they choose to redevelop, they can get that additional density that they might need in order to provide no net loss of affordable housing. So that would be the committee was 2-1 on adding language to the plan that would have those buildings achieve density by going through the local map amendment process.
Councilmember Reamer.
Great. I don't know if anyone is going to make a motion, but I'll just say, when we started with this plan, there was no recommended zoning change for these properties. There was a recommendation to encourage I wouldn't quite say it an historic district, but encourage the property owners to go for National Historic designation, which I suppose I understand would let them claim some kind of tax credits for preservation of the structures. I didn't think that was adequate. I felt, and the committee majority, well, the whole committee felt that over the long run, we ought to envision redevelopment here. But we were very concerned that we set up an expectation about the retention or the no net loss of affordable housing. So the proposal that you have, I think it's really a difference of degree of intentionality about preservation of affordable housing. And so the committee's recommendation was to set up a floating zone with a clear indication of the amount of density that could be obtained through it, and then enable a negotiation process with the planning board. We felt that would not be particularly onerous, and we certainly thought that it might appeal to a nonprofit if a nonprofit were to be able to purchase one of these properties or multiple properties. And so that wouldn't, it could be done on a for-profit basis as well. But in any event, that is the committee recommendation, was to set up a framework for redevelopment and provide a tool to the planning board for negotiation that would be a strong tool enabling them to preserve affordable housing through redevelopment.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think we talked at length last time about this, so I think colleagues are fairly well versed in the discussion here. Ultimately, I supported the council staff recommendation, which was to rezone these properties with master plan language that specifically talked about no net loss of affordable housing, under the main premise that our biggest risk here is a fairly modest amount of investment would allow for rents to go up by quite a bit, and we would lose everything in terms of the affordability of these units, because there are no restrictions. These are units that I believe were built mostly in the 1930s, pre-World War II units, and that is a major challenge. So the risk here isn't really in redevelopment. It's really in a very small investment, allowing rents to go much higher to market and beyond, for area median income. So currently, these are really important units that are providing significant degrees of affordability, 50% AMI approximately, which is pretty incredible with no restrictions on them. But the likelihood that that will continue moving forward is getting more and more limited. And so by creating a dynamic here where we're increasing the cost of redevelopment, we're making it more likely that the most rational, most economically reasonable decision would be to make a modest investment to fix up the appliances, to fix up the aesthetics of the properties, and charge significantly more rent as a consequence. That's the most cost-effective way of maximizing the value of the property. And ultimately, we have significant power here, but limited power. We can only nurture nature, and we work in in an economy that people are going to make rational decisions with their investments. The floating zone was considered by the planning board and the planning staff, as we had heard. It was ultimately not recommended. This was really a response to the planning staff recommendations to rezone the properties. And I will say the planning staff's recommendation to rezone the properties was to provide the same relative rezoning for the other similar properties as MHP, the nonprofit affordable housing provider, was being provided. Understanding for all of us related to this that the current owners of those other properties have not expressed an interest in doing anything for right now. And so whether we put a floating zone here or not, the likelihood that something is going to happen is minimal. And the question is, if and when something does happen, what's the most likely outcome that we're going to achieve? And I don't think no net loss of affordable housing is the most likely outcome if we move forward with the floating zone. With that, I'm not making a motion. We'll see if other colleagues have any views here, and happy to move forward with the will of the body. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any colleagues interested in making a motion, so without objection, we will accept the committee recommendation. And I'd like to note Councilmember Navarro whispered in my ear that she supported the committee recommendation on this as well. Anything else?
Covers it. So the next steps are that we work with planning staff to create the resolution that provides back to the council all the changes that you've made through these 3 work sessions. So you will have a resolution that states all the changes, which will become the new Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan.
Great. Thank you all very much. And
Thank you
to our colleagues and friends in planning for helping out with this on every level. All right, that takes us to the next item on the agenda, which is a work session in action. Hoping this will be pretty straightforward. Okay, so this is a special appropriation to the FY22 operating budget, Montgomery County Government Incubator Programs, Economic Development Partnership Non-Departmental Account in the amount of $789,000. I'll turn it over to Chair Navarro. I'm sorry, Chair Reamer, please make some comments, and then Councilmember Jawando.
Yeah, and indeed, perhaps the whole committee will wish to speak. Okay, really glad to be here today as the council will hopefully take action on a set of appropriations that are intended to really be transformational in the county's support for minority-owned business, black-owned business, businesses owned by women, entrepreneurs of color, entrepreneurs with disabilities. There are a number of critical provisions here, and I want to start by saying appreciate the GO committee, which recommended annualizing the appropriations that we're going to approve here today in the in the final council budget. The executive sent us a budget for FY23 that had enough money in it to annualize these appropriations, and we're grateful for the executive for sending that placeholder for us to continue this work here. So what we're doing right now is approving an FY22 appropriation that allows this work to get going quickly and then carry through with FY23. I know that there's a little bit of language change we need to make, and there's an issue about contract and the procurement process that we're going to handle next week, not this week. But the basic idea here is that to take an example, if black-owned business in this region was performing or succeeding at the share of the population of the black community, that we would have thousands and thousands of more jobs and companies and payroll and higher incomes. And we need to look at the entrepreneur community here, all of the entrepreneurship community, and ensure that we're investing and supporting their strength and their success. So the specific provisions include a new incubation center strategy, taking advantage of the Silver Spring space that we have that is underfilled, but also providing a county-wide strategy that will help businesses with procurement. That could be private, national, or federal, state, or local. Helping them get contracts to do business with other businesses and government. Supporting the collection of information about black-owned businesses that are here in the county through a database proposed by entrepreneurs and business leaders in the county. And I want to give a big shout out to the Black Collective. We worked closely with the NAACP on the incubator and the Black Collective on a set of policies that you find here. For example, the Black Business Database, and MCEDC has been supporting that as well. Providing support for the Maryland Small Business Development Center to provide technical assistance for tenants and other local businesses in our incubators, tenants in our incubators and other local businesses, including a bilingual assistance program so that Hispanic-owned businesses will also have access to resources for procurement, which is a major opportunity in this region. And CEO training. There's an accelerator training program that this will fund to provide support to local businesses. We're also providing support for the nonprofit village to fund and run a incubator space for nonprofits founded and operated by black executives, and a contract for the Black Collective to do business engagement and network building, which is a crucial component of a successful ecosystem. And one of the things I think that over time might have tremendous possibilities is providing support for a contract to develop a new CDFI. And there is a lot of federal assistance right now flowing to CDFIs to provide capital, which is a crucial need for entrepreneurs' grants and loans. And we are seeding the creation of a new CDFI that can support, for example, black-owned business and create a new institution here. So all kinds of exciting elements of this appropriation. We're, again, glad that it is annualized in the FY23 budget. This is the FY22 budget. I want to thank Councilmember Jawando. We worked together closely to develop this. Councilmember Friedson, we worked together closely to develop this. This is a committee recommendation that we're enthusiastic about. But again, this was community driven. This was community driven. This came to us from leaders in the community, and I think it's going to be a smashing success. So I look forward to it coming forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then we have language that Jean will point our attention to, and I believe I'll need to make a motion to reflect that, but I know my colleagues may wish to speak. Back to you, Mr. Council President.
Thank you. Just Councilmember Jawando's in the queue, and then go ahead and make that motion.
Thank you, and I'll be quick. That was a robust explanation of the package that we worked on, and I really appreciate Councilmember Reamer for working together to spearhead this, and Councilmember Friedson as a member of Fed supporting it, and all of our colleagues who I know support it. This is a really big deal, and I think it was important to go through each line item because a lot of times we kind of gloss over things. And there are several aspects of addressing the needs in the black business community and the business community of color and women and disabled business community that are critically important here. The technical assistance, the seeding of an idea of an entity that would potentially help with financing and access to capital for underserved businesses like black businesses, which have a big trouble. And I think we often underestimate
being able to navigate the system is such a big barrier. Yesterday I was walking back from lunch and met a woman, an African-American woman, who was wandering around, just had come out of the executive office building. And she was huffing and puffing. She had 2 bags, and she was frustrated. And she said, I said, "Can I help you?" And she said, "Yeah, I need to find the ride-on office," right? And she had taken the bus here and was trying to get to the ride-on office. And the building's, it's kind of a intimidated building. It's a ghost town. There's no one at the reception. So all my colleagues running for county executive, we need someone in the reception when you walk in that building. She was getting ready to leave. And I said, "Well, let me take you up to the 5th floor." I knew where that was. And I took her up there, and she got the assistance she needed. Not starting a business, but it's just an example of, what if I didn't walk by? She would have gotten all the way here and then left and not received any assistance. I've been thinking about her all night. And a lot of our businesses, they have great ideas. They want to get going. They don't know where to go to get the support. And developing this network, putting money into building out who our businesses are, helping them succeed, helping them with capital, supporting them with space in the terms of nonprofit village. These are critical components. The Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce with the work they're going to do, and the Small Business Development Center. So this is just really exciting work, and it's something that we have to annualize and work on for all of our small businesses. We have to build from the bottom up and the middle out, and these businesses are a critical component to our economic growth and development, and in our success for our whole entire community. So last thing I'll say on this. We know disproportionately these businesses have been hit hard and discriminated against and not had the opportunities. I mentioned the stat that at a certain point during the pandemic, nearly 40% of black businesses in a national survey had disappeared. And so it's not only important for our economy, it's the right thing to do from a racial equity and social justice standpoint as well. So I appreciate everyone's support and really look forward to moving this forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Gene, if you can tee up the motion that Councilmember Reamer will move forward.
Sounds good. The council introduced this appropriation on March 15th. Following that, county attorneys and council attorney provided some revised language that the lead sponsors looked at, agreed to, and rather than going to committee, they just recommended it going straight to full council. And so on circles 4 through 6 is the marked version that shows these amendments proposed by the county attorneys or council attorney. And so a motion would need to be made, a second. The council would need to approve those amendments and then adopt the clean resolution that's on circles 7 through 9 to implement the resolution as noted by Mr. Reamer and Mr. Jawando.
So I move the language on, as you described, circle pages 4 through 6.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Jawando. Any other discussion? This is a hand vote.
I want to say thanks to Ruth Semple is here. Ruth's had some terrific contributions to this conversation, and also Renee Sproul on my staff, who's had a lot of great contributions. Thank you.
And Pam Luckett on my staff.
All right. This is important. Appreciate all the efforts here. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous among all those present.
Mr. Albornoz, I see Rice. Mr. Rice has his hand up on the screen over there.
Right. So that is unanimous among all those present. All right. Thank you all very much. That moves us on to the consent calendar. Can I get a motion to move the consent?
Sorry, that was just for the amendments.
My bad.
No worries.
My bad. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
The motion and second to approve the resolution as amended.
So moved. Oh, second.
Moved by Councilmember Jawando, seconded by Councilmember Reamer. No discussion. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous as well among all those present and virtual. Great. That moves us on to the consent calendar. Can I get a motion to accept the consent calendar? Moved by Councilmember Friedson, seconded by Council Vice President Glass. Is there any discussion or comment regarding the consent calendar? Hearing none. All those in favor of the consent calendar, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous among all those present and virtual. Colleagues, we're going to recess until 1:45 to give us a little bit more time for lunch today. So 1:45, we will be back from recess. Thank you all.